One day, I was in school for a seemingly average Thursday. I was a senior in high school and in my third-hour history class. This was one of my favorite classes because the teacher was really cool. For this story, I'll just call him Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was very laid back and would give us a lot of time to do homework in class. We would rarely have any actual homework because we could get it all done before we left. He would teach for a bit in the beginning, and then the end of class would pretty much be like study hall. We could talk and get work done. He would even let us go on our phones or listen to music as we worked. So on this day, it was a normal class period. I often had my headphones in as I studied, and I did on this day. We were working on our assignment, and I got done early. I would joke around with Mr. Smith sometimes, as did other students. I remember that I went up to him to turn in my assignment, and he asked me if I wanted to do him a favor. He said that he had to give back some iPads to another teacher. We had used them the previous day for a group assignment thing. There were about 10 iPads in this carrying case. I was happy to do this because it was something to do to get out of class. He wrote me a pass and I took the iPad case. It was supposed to go to a teacher's classroom that was a little ways away. I left the classroom with my headphones still in and I unpaused my music. Then I started walking through the empty hallways to the other teacher's classroom. At this point, there was probably about 15 minutes left of class. Soon, I reached the classroom that I was supposed to go to. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I could see in the window as well that all of the lights were off. I found this a bit odd, but quickly figured that the teacher wasn't there. She probably didn't teach a class during this hour or something. I turned around and started to head back to my classroom. I walked about halfway back when I saw something up ahead. There was a spot where two hallways intersected a ways up. I saw a man up ahead who I didn't recognize. He clearly wasn't a teacher, and I didn't think he worked at the school either. It struck me as suspicious right away. I only saw him for about a second or two because he passed by one hallway and into the other. He didn't look in my direction at all. The problem was that he was walking in the direction that my classroom was in. I kept walking up ahead, and when I got to where the man had walked past, I stopped and looked down the hallway first. When I did, I saw the guy again. He was a long ways down, near where my classroom was. It appeared as though he was looking for something. I didn't want to go down there, and I started walking in the opposite direction. I took out my headphones at that point. Everything was silent. I didn't really know where I was going anymore, and I was trying to figure out what exactly was going on. After walking around the empty hallways for like 5 minutes, I thought maybe the man was gone by then, and I started heading back for my class. When I got back to the hallway where I had last seen him, he was gone. I was just glad to see this, and I started walking down the hallway for my class. Just a few steps later, though, I heard footsteps coming from behind me and around the corner. They were going towards me, and there were some bathrooms right there, so I just went inside. I didn't know who the person was, but I really didn't want them to see me. By now, I figured that they weren't supposed to be in the school. After going inside of the bathroom, at first, I just waited inside. But when the footsteps got closer, I moved into one of the stalls. The guy passed by and did not go inside. I waited a little while longer before looking out of the bathroom. When I did, I saw that the person was a ways down the hallway, once again near where my class was. I left the bathroom and quickly tried to walk to the other hallway, away from this guy. I must have been loud or something when I did, because as I was walking, I heard movement behind me. I looked and saw the guy looking right at me. He turned and started walking in my direction. The guy was really far behind me, at least over 100 feet. I walked as quickly as possible out of that hallway and took another one. By this point, I just wanted to get out of the school or far away from the guy. I walked down that hallway for a while and then took a left to another one. I was going to the stairs to go down to the first floor. As I approached the stairs, though, I heard somebody coming up the stairs. I stopped and didn't know who this person could be. When they came into view, I saw that it was a police officer. He asked me what I was doing, and I asked him what was going on. He told me that the school was under a lockdown, and they were searching for a suspicious man. I pointed him in the direction that I had last seen him. Then I went downstairs and saw several more officers. I showed them my student ID, and we found a nearby classroom, and I had to wait inside there until the lockdown was over. It lasted for probably about 15 more minutes, and then it ended. We were let out, and by then, it was time for the next class period. I'm not sure who that guy was, or what he was even doing. I also don't know how he got into our school either. I hadn't been able to hear that we were going into lockdown though because my headphones were in and I couldn't hear anything. Looking back, if I would have known, I would have tried to go into any classroom. I don't know what would have happened to me if that guy caught up with me either, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. This happened when I was in high school. For some detail, I'm a female and was a junior at the time this took place. I used to walk to school and back every day because I lived pretty close to the school. So it would usually take me around 10 to 15 minutes to walk there, and I would take sidewalks basically the entire way. One morning, I left when I usually did at about 7:30 a.m. because school started at 7:50. After walking out the front door and leaving my house with my backpack, I saw a car on the side of the street. It was right in front of the sidewalk where I would walk past. I had never seen it before, so I didn't know who it was. I planned to just go right past it, but when I did, I saw the passenger side window rolling down. Somebody said something, and I looked over. The car was an older dark gray BMW, and the driver was a young-looking guy, but seemed to be a little bit older than me. He then asked me if I needed a ride to school. I had never seen this guy before and didn't think that he even went to my school. He told me his name was, I think, Ryan, but I can't remember exactly. He said which school he went to, which happened to be a school in the next city over. Then he said that he was good friends with Erica, who happened to be one of my best friends. Apparently, he was going to pick her up, and she asked him to pick me up as well and give us both rides to school. I said no thanks. I had never heard Erica talk about this guy before, and it just seemed really weird. The guy asked me why not, and I said maybe some other time. I wanted to confirm with Erica if she knew this guy at all. I figured there was a chance that she was friends with him, but she hadn't said anything to me about this. Obviously, it was a little bit suspicious. The guy seemed disappointed, but ultimately said okay. I kept walking down the street as he pulled away in his car and drove past me. But right when he got past me, he stopped his car on the road. He rolled down his window again and said, "Last chance." I said no again, and then he finally drove off. I walked the rest of the way to school and got there at basically my normal time. As I was walking, I texted Erica about it. In that semester of high school, my first hour class was English. By the time I got to class, I had gotten a response from Erica. I usually didn't get to see her before school because our first hour classes were on the opposite ends of the school from each other. She said that she didn't even know who I was talking about. I had a feeling that's what she was going to say. This was a mystery to me of who this guy really was and why he tried to pick me up in his car. He knew that I had a friend named Erica, and he also knew where I went to school, but I didn't know him at all. During that same first hour English class, probably about 30 minutes in, the school went into a lockdown. I had no clue what it was for at the time. We had never had a lockdown before in my entire time at the school, just a few drills. We were all told to sit at the back of the class. The classroom lights were turned off, and the door was locked by our teacher. We all sat in mostly silence for what felt like a really long time. It didn't really last that long though, it was probably about 20 minutes. Eventually, the lockdown was lifted. By that time, we were all very curious as to what was going on. By the end of the day, I had found out. A man apparently walked into the school after class had started and right past the receptionist. The only door that was open after class started was the front door. He was then spotted by a hall monitor who asked him for a pass. The guy walked past him without saying anything and went to the locker commons. Then he hid there and the school was locked down. Unfortunately, the guy ran out from the locker commons to the nearest exit and was able to get out. The school and property was searched, but he had gotten away. It was good that he was gone, but it was also bad that he wasn't caught. Some of us were wondering where he went, but it could have been anywhere. There was large woods behind our school, and I think they pretty much gave up on the search when they found out he wasn't on the school property anymore. Still, I had no clue who the guy was who had been inside the school. I didn't even connect the dots at all. After school that day, I walked home like I always did. I was less than halfway there when I once again saw the car that was at my house earlier. I got a bad feeling. This guy was not who he claimed to be, and I knew that. The car was parked on the side of the road again, on the side that I had to walk past. I sped up and started walking faster, but when I got even with the car, once again I heard him say something. His window was already down, and the guy said hi. I looked over and said hi, all while continuing to walk. He then told me to stop. I didn't and ignored him. Then he said, "You know I was in your school earlier." I stopped and couldn't believe what I was hearing. He then started to laugh, and it was really creepy. He basically bragged about how they had locked the school down, and he managed to escape. As he was saying this, he opened his car door and got out. I walked even faster until the guy started to run. Then, at that point, I had to start running too. Unfortunately, it seemed as though he was a little bit faster than I was. I could tell that he was gaining on me. I left the sidewalk and ran out into the middle of the road. Then came possibly one of the luckiest moments of my entire life. A car started driving down that otherwise quiet road. I ran straight for the car, and when I got close, noticed that it was somebody that I actually knew. It was one of my classmates, a guy named Matt. He saw me and stopped his car. I ran for the passenger side, while the man chasing me continued to come after me and was about 20 feet back. I got inside of Matt's car and told him to lock the doors. The guy chasing reached the car moments later. The doors locked, and the guy tried getting in and then began pounding on the door when he couldn't. Matt asked me who this guy was, and I told him to just get out of there. He drove away, with the guy standing in the street. I explained to Matt as I got out my phone to call the police. I told them everything, and Matt dropped me off at my house a short time later. The police came out and talked with me and my parents, and said that they would look out for the car that I described. That same day, the man was located by the police. He had been stalking me for several days without me even knowing. I'm not sure exactly why he went into our school. Maybe he was waiting for me to get back to my locker. He could have honestly passed for a student because he looked young, but he was actually in his mid-20s and not a student at all. This was years ago now, but I still remember it all the time. I'm really glad Matt was driving by when he did. I don't know what would have happened to me if not. I'm a teacher, and this is something that happened a couple of years ago. It was during my 4th year teaching at the high school that I still currently teach at. I teach math, and had 4 different classes throughout the day that semester. It kept me very busy between teaching, preparing lessons, and grading assignments. One day, about a month into the school year, I was teaching like any other. It was the first hour of the day, and I was in the middle of going through a problem on the whiteboard. That's when the phone rang in my classroom. I paused what I was doing and walked over to answer it. I was told the school was being locked down, but I wasn't told why. After that, the announcement came over the entire school intercom. Some of the kids in class started to talk and asked me what the cause of the lockdown was. I honestly didn't know, and I told them that. I did what I was supposed to do and turned out the lights and locked the doors. I instructed the students to the back of the classroom. There were 20 kids in my class, and they all did what I said, but still wanted to know why we were in a lockdown. I knew this was not a drill, and I was pretty curious myself. I went to my desk and sat down in the chair. Then we all just waited. Minutes went by, which felt like forever. After about 10 minutes, my cell phone started vibrating. It was on top of my desk, and I picked it up to see who was calling me. It was a number that I didn't recognize. I was about to let it ring, but I thought it was possibly information about the lockdown. It may have been from another teacher whose number I didn't have yet. It could have been from another staff member as well. That's what was going through my mind in the moment. At the last minute, I accepted the call. I held the phone up to my ear and listened as I heard a man start to speak. I didn't really recognize his voice. He spoke professionally and told me that I was needed in the principal's office immediately. I asked why, and I was told that it would be discussed when I got there. I was very confused. I said I couldn't leave my class, and I was told that I needed to go anyways. Then he hung up. I saw my students looking at me, no doubt wondering what I was told on the phone. Then one of them spoke up and asked. I told them the truth and said somebody asked me to the principal's, and I really didn't know why. I was debating whether I should go or not. I got up from my desk and walked over to the door. Then I looked out the window and into the hallway. It was very empty. But then I saw someone. It was sort of far to the left, just barely in my sight. There was a man standing there wearing all black, including a ski mask. I quickly moved back after seeing him. One of the students asked me if I was going to go, and I said no, I wasn't. I told everyone to stay at the back of the class, and I joined them. I had no clue who the person in the hallway was, but the fact that they were wearing a ski mask could not be good. They were likely the reason for the lockdown. I didn't want my students to know that the person was so close though. Things were very silent for a few minutes. We couldn't hear anything from out in the hallways. It felt like forever, and the more time that went by, the more worried I became. I got another phone call on my phone from the same number, but I ignored it. They called back again, and at that point, I turned off my phone entirely. We all waited in the classroom for almost an hour. Finally, I got another call on my phone in the classroom. I walked over and picked it up. I was told that the lockdown was over, and then there was an announcement over the intercom letting us know. Class was over, and I let the students out. When I found out more details from the lockdown, I couldn't believe it. The person in the ski mask was a former student of our high school. He was also a former student of mine, who I had failed. He came back to the school, and he was the one who called me on my cell phone as well. I'm not sure how he got my number, but he did. He was trying to get me out of my classroom. I'm not sure what he was planning to do then, possibly attack me. I don't want to think about that. Luckily, he was spotted by a faculty member, which sent the school into a lockdown. Eventually, the police came and were able to locate the suspect and catch him, although he was able to evade them for quite a while. I still can't believe it, even to this day. I can't imagine what would have happened had I left the classroom. It was too strange though, and I never really seriously considered it. I could tell that something was really suspicious. Still, I will never forget seeing him in the hallway. It was one of the scariest sights of my life.
I used to think that lockdown drills were pointless in my school because nothing ever happened in our tiny little town. I learned that I couldn't have been more wrong though, and I'll forever be thankful for those drills because they're most likely the only reason that a lot of kids in my grade are still alive today. It all went down during our pre-prom assembly. We had all heard about the assembly from seniors that had to go through it the previous year, and according to them, it was super boring. It was pretty much an hour-long talk about why drinking and driving was bad, something that we were all well aware of, but it didn't even make it 5 minutes into the speech before all hell broke loose. It may have been 4 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Miss Belmont was walking across the stage as she prepared to show a video on the dangers of drinking and driving on prom night. Everyone in the auditorium was quietly talking amongst themselves as they pretended to listen to her talk, but within a matter of a second, silence came over the entire room. Around 200 high school juniors fell silent as the sound of gunshots rang out from the hallway. The way our school was laid out, our auditorium was placed right inside the main entrance, and from the sound of things, the shooting was coming from near the greeter's desk right on the other side of the auditorium doors. 2 shots were fired, and everyone inside the auditorium quickly lowered themselves down into our seats as we listened in hopes that we had all misheard what was going on, but that clearly wasn't the case. Before anything else happened, I'll never forget how calm and collected Miss Belmont was as she spoke over the microphone and told all of us to follow our typical lockdown protocols. All of us turned our attention away from the auditorium doors and looked at the teachers up on the stage as they all gestured for us to slowly come out of our seats and make our way up the stairs next to the stage. Surprisingly enough, we all did our best to stay calm and followed the teacher's directions as we formed multiple lines leading up the stairs to the auditorium stage. The room was beginning to fill with quiet muttering as we all worried about what was going to happen to us, and I remember looking around to see if I could find any of my friends. We all slowly made our way onto the stage, and then one of the teachers walked us over to an emergency exit that was located right on the other side of the curtain. He began ushering people through the door, which was what we were all taught to do since the auditorium doors didn't lock properly. After exiting the door, we were supposed to make our way into the hallway between the auditorium and the music classrooms, and from there, we were supposed to go right into those classrooms and lock the doors as we waited. I was toward the front of the line, and I remember feeling the teacher pull me forward to keep the line moving as we began walking out into the hallway. However, I didn't make it 2 steps out of the door before the few of us that made it out all stopped. We were stunned to see the gunman had made his way around the auditorium and was now looking down the hallway that we're all standing in. We quickly turned around and began forcing our way back into the auditorium as we all yelled that the shooter was in the hallway. We could hear shots being fired as bullets hit the walls near where we had all been standing. Thankfully, we all managed to make it back into the auditorium, and the teacher quickly closed the door behind us. He grabbed a ladder that was right next to him and stuck one of its legs through the door handle and used the rest of the ladder to bar the door shut. It came just in time too, because as soon as it was secured, we could hear the man on the other side of the door trying to force it open. We all quickly stepped away from the door as another teacher made their way around and tried their best to secure all of the emergency exits in a similar fashion. As the next couple of minutes passed, we could periodically hear the sounds of shots being fired throughout the school. Each time it seemed like the gunman was getting farther and farther away, but that didn't matter. Every second that passed, we were all horrified that he would come back our way and try to get into the auditorium again. It took 9 minutes for the police to arrive, but when they finally got there, they cleared out the school and managed to take down the shooter without having to fire a single shot at him. The shooter turned out to be a substitute teacher, and although the 2 greeters along with the school security guard ended up getting shot, they all made full recoveries, and as far as I know, they still work at the school. That was hands down the most terrifying day of my life and the most memorable school assembly that I ever attended. It wasn't until my sophomore year of high school that I learned the importance of keeping at least one ear open when you're in public. And by that, I simply mean don't have both headphones on when you're out of the house. I learned this simply because I had both my soundproof headphones on during study hall one day, and I kept them on when I ran to the bathroom between classes. Well, it was during that time that the lockdown bell rang, and all of the students in the rest of the school were notified to get into the nearest classroom because there was an unknown adult on the premises. As I said, I had my headphones on and I couldn't hear anything, so when I walked out of the bathroom into a cleared out hallway, I just assumed that I missed the bell. I let out a sigh as I figured I was going to get in trouble for being late to class, and I started walking down the hall. As I made my way around a corner, I saw a man standing in the hallway looking around, and when he saw me, he immediately pointed in my direction. I thought that I was going to get in trouble, so I took my headphones off and immediately apologized and told the man that I was on my way to class. I just got held up in the bathroom. He told me that it didn't matter what my excuse was, and that he needed to escort me to class so he could talk to the teacher. I rolled my eyes and said all right as we both started walking toward my class. Right away, I started getting the weird feeling from this guy since he kept looking down at me but not saying anything. We made it to the base of the stairs that I normally took to get to my trigonometry class, which he would have known if he actually worked in the school. But instead of turning to go up the stairs, the man kept walking me down the hall that we were in. That was when I realized that, unlike the rest of the school staff, the man wasn't wearing any sort of school badge or name tag. My eyes widened as this stranger continued to guide me down the hallway, and I decided to ask him what class he taught. He responded by simply saying, "Don't question me." And then he placed his hand on the back of my neck and continued to walk me down the hall. As we made our way around a corner, I could see one of the entrances to the school and knew in my gut that this guy was trying to get me to leave the building. I knew that I didn't have much time, and all I could do was try to run. I started walking a bit fast to try to get ahead of him so his hand wasn't touching me anymore. And the second I felt the slightest bit of distance between us, I quickly spun to the right and sprinted right past him, back down the hall that we came from. I made it to the base of the staircase and started running up it as I heard the footsteps of the man chasing me. As I made it to the top of the stairs, I could hear him getting closer and closer. But thankfully, as I stepped out the staircase onto the second floor hallway, I saw 2 security guards who were looking for the intruder. I yelled to them that he was right behind me, and they immediately started running toward me. I turned around and saw the man as he made his way back down the stairs, and the school security guards pursued him. At that moment, I noticed one of the teachers across the hall from me gesturing for me to come into their classroom. So I did that as fast as I could and spent the rest of the lockdown waiting for them to tell us that the school was safe. My parents were called and I had to speak with the police after it was all over, and thankfully by the end of the day, they ended up arresting the guy after finding him trying to sneak through backyards in town. They believe he was trying to make it back to his house, which was also right in town. Ever since then, I will always pay attention to any announcement made when I'm out somewhere.
To start, both my parents and I have grown up in a small southeastern town in Kentucky. The landscape is quite rural, and the actual city only has one stoplight in it, even in 2019. For the most part, the area is peaceful, and it feels as if everyone knows each other. While this story doesn't involve the paranormal, it is extremely terrifying. A real-life nightmare, if you will. The story begins on September 18th, 1989 in the county's only high school. Both of my parents were teachers at this said school. My mother happened to be in her planning period and was sitting in her teacher's lounge with a few other personnel. Their planning was cut short when a fellow female teacher ran screaming immediately into the teacher's round, stating, "He's got a gun! He's got a gun!" Understandably, the teacher was too distressed to explain in detail and immediately ran screaming out of the lounge. Everyone immediately scrambled to escape or hide from the gunmen. My mother, a fellow teacher and teacher's aide, ran into a small closet and attempted to hide. The closet was tiny, and along with 3 small women currently occupying it, was also home to a fold-away bed. No matter how hard they tried to close the door, the bed kept getting in the way. They were afraid to open the door and shove the bed out, as it would be a dead giveaway that someone was in the closet. After the initial shock, things began to quiet down in the school. They could hear a few shots fired, but had no idea how close the gunfire was in proximity to them. They literally crammed like sardines in a hot closet, unsure when or if the shooter would come for them. Though they tried to remain silent, my mother did make a plea for their salvation, as it was almost certain they wouldn't make it out of the school alive. The time ticked away slowly, and after an hour of being in the closet, they began to hear footsteps. The footsteps were slowly coming down the hallway toward the room they were in. Soft sounds clicking as if someone was searching around the hallway. As they came closer, the footsteps stopped in the doorway of the teacher's lounge. It was almost as if they could feel a pair of eyes searching the room from top to bottom, looking for any sign of life. My mom and the other woman had their hands on the doorknob, trying to keep it closed as much as possible. They were almost certain this was the end. Suddenly, they heard the person walk away and enter a nearby bathroom. My father also had a free first block, so he was seated at his desk trying to catch up on grading student assignments. Suddenly, he heard a loud noise, which he said sounded like a large table falling over. He wondered at what the sound might be, but figured it was simply a table that had gotten knocked over or someone had dropped several textbooks. Unlike the teacher's lounge, my father's classroom was located upstairs in a smaller portion of the school. While he continued grading papers, he began to hear someone running down the hallway. It was a teacher that seemed to be searching through the classrooms. He stopped in the doorway and said, "One of the kids brought a gun and has taken hostages. We need to evacuate the other classmates immediately." My dad quickly said, "I'll take the right side of the hall and you take the left." They then set off running down the halls to notify teachers and students. However, most of the classrooms had already been emptied. They would find out later that many of the classrooms had heard the initial gunshots and realized instantly what the sound was. The first floor classrooms had tried to evacuate by either running to the far stairwell or jumping out the windows into the parking lot. The classroom doors had small windows in which you could see people passing outside. The classroom that was located across the gunfire had been too scared to exit into the hallway, at risk of being shot. The students were all jumping out of the windows in droves. The poor teacher was heavily pregnant, and the windows were quite narrow and only slanted slightly when they opened. It took a great deal of effort, but they got her out of the window. The students and teachers were scared for their life, not knowing if the shooter would suddenly barge into their room and begin shooting as they tried to exit. My dad eventually located a classroom that had not been evacuated. He ran over to the teacher and explained the situation. He then spoke to the students and told them, "You need to exit the school right now. Don't take your belongings. Don't go to the bathroom. Don't talk to anyone. As quietly as you can, take the far stairwell and don't look behind you. Go now." My dad is likely one of the most laid-back individuals you could ever meet. The students knew this and listened closely, knowing the situation was dire. Everyone rushed to the far stairwell, away from the gunmen, and exited to the bus garage. Dad said that the police arrived within minutes of them emptying the building and corralled everyone over to a funeral home that was across the road from the high school. Within 30 minutes, a SWAT team arrived and had set up a perimeter both inside and outside of the school. A family member had found out about the situation and called my grandfather, my mother's father. He had rushed to the school to check on his daughter and son-in-law. As my dad was waiting with the students in the funeral home parking lot, he began to search for my mother. My father asked one of the teachers that had been in the lounge with my mom if he had seen her. He said he thought she was outside. Dad once again searched through the crowd asking if anyone had seen my mother. By this time, my grandfather had arrived and asked my father where my mom was. He said that he couldn't find her. He again asked the teacher who had been in the lounge with her, and he said, "Well, come to think of it, I remember her saying that she might hide in the closet." Everyone was terrified of what might have happened to her, since it had been close to 3 hours since the gunman had entered the building. My father and grandfather notified some of the Kentucky State Police that were on the scene. Under the watchful eyes of snipers located in the parking lot and on the roof, the KSP officers entered the school and headed for the closet they thought my mother was in. My mother said that she and the other woman could hear someone outside, and they almost died of fright. Without announcement, the doorknob was suddenly ripped from their hands, and light flooded into the closet. Not hearing a cacophony of gunfire, my mom looked up and realized there were 2 armed state troopers standing outside the closet. She said that it was probably the best sight in her entire life. There were no times for tears of joy, though. The officers told my mother and the other 2 women, "You're going to be okay, but we need to get you out of the building ASAP. We need you to rush down the hallway, and when you come into the lobby to exit, you need to run." After a count, my mother was ushered from teacher's lounge toward the high school lobby. She said when she rounded the corner, there were multiple snipers set up in the hall along with a .50 caliber machine gun pointed at the classroom where the shooter was. That day, my mother had worn a dress and heels, and she said she could remember trying to run across the grass in her heels, getting stuck in the soil. She kept running through until she joined the others in the funeral home parking lot. The initial takeover had begun around 9:50 a.m. during the first block of classes. The shooter had entered the school with 3 guns, 1 shotgun, a .357 pistol, and a .44 caliber Magnum, and walked into his first block class. Upon entering the classroom, he shot into the ceiling through the art classroom located above. Luckily, no one was hit by a bullet or debris of the initial shot. He released 2 rows of students and the teacher before settling in for a standoff. The woman that initially told everyone in the teacher's lounge about the shooting had been the teacher released from the classroom. Over the next few hours, students were released for small requests like cigarettes, soft drinks, and pizza. Multiple shots were fired throughout the ordeal, but thankfully no one was injured or killed. The shooter was later identified as a 17-year-old student at the high school, advised police that he would surrender if he could see his father. He told police that he hadn't seen his father since he was 4 years old. Around 5 p.m. that day, the last hostage was released. The Kentucky State Police eventually negotiated his surrender before his father could arrive from Florida. While most people never know the reason behind such an insane act of violence, upon questioning, the shooter referred to the Stephen King book Rage as his inspiration for the shooting. Crazy enough, my dad didn't think the student served any prison time. It was his belief that while the boy was initially taken to jail after surrendering, he was never tried and was instead released out of the county and told to never return. I guess 1989 was a different time. My dad says that word had quickly spread after the takeover, and that many parents had arrived to the scene and were looking for their children. One of them asked my father where his son was, and my dad wasn't for sure, and that's what he told the parent. However, he had been too afraid to tell him that he thought he was currently being held hostage. It turns out he was. Many of the students held hostage suffered from PTSD and had to undergo counseling for many years. Fortunately, no one was physically harmed, though. Once my parents were finally released from the scene, they had driven straight to my babysitters to pick me up. Being less than a year old, I was oblivious to the chaos that my parents had experienced that day. They say when they saw me, they picked me up and prayed that the little girl would never have to experience anything like that.
Back in my mid to late 20s, I worked a job as a security guard at a Kmart supercenter in Iowa City, Iowa. Most of you probably never heard of Kmart before, but to put it in simple terms, just imagine a cheaper Walmart/Target. Business was booming back in the early 2000s, and nowadays a lot of Kmarts ended up closing down. My job was to keep watch of one that was currently in the process of relocating. It was a chill job, although a bit boring, as you'd be the only one in the store with nothing to do. This never really bothered me, as I'd always find myself playing games on my phone or texting a friend to pass time. Well, one day I had been scheduled to work a double, meaning I'd be working both the day and night shift. The reason for this was because the other security guard who did the night shifts quit on the spot and went to go make a living in real estate. Because apparently this guy's obviously never heard of a 2 weeks notice before, and they scheduled me until they could find another person. This got on my nerves pretty easily, and sitting in the dark making $14 an hour didn't help. That being said, I really didn't have a choice and bit my lip and agreed to work a double. Throughout the day, things went well for the most part, watching the movers relocate the shelves, equipment, etc. 7 p.m. comes around and I prepare myself for a long 10-hour night shift. Being all alone in an empty store with no light but a little office in the back is scary enough. Now let's fast forward till around 1 a.m. I'm sitting on my chair by the front when I hear one of the radios turn on in the back office. It's not uncommon for them to go off once in a while, as they tend to pick up signal from someone else on the same channel. Not thinking anything of it, I tend to my phone when I hear it go off again, this time with a much stronger signal. At that point, I get up and walk toward the back office when I hear this low, grainy voice say, "I can see you." My heart sank into the pit of my stomach as I heard him say this, and it was then where I asked who it was. After getting no response, I glance over to the back exit of the store, and due to the glow of the red exit sign, I was able to make out the silhouette of a person. However, for some reason, I don't think they saw me, and I played dumb by looking the other way and turning off all of the radios. I wasn't just gonna go back to my post with someone possibly dangerous in the building with me, so I did the only thing I could do. Right then, I turn around and start booking it toward the front entrance as I heard whoever it was trying to catch up. Thankfully, I made it out the door, locking it behind me. A few seconds later, I see this tall man dressed in all black run up to the front and put his hands on the window. He was not a pleasant-looking man. His eyes were wild and his grin was menacing. At that point, I called the police, where they thankfully arrived in a few minutes, where they went inside the building. However, like in most situations like this, whoever was inside the store with me was gone. Police concluded that they had simply left through the emergency exit. Needless to say, I continued my shift while a patrol car stayed in front just in case whoever it was came back. Till this day, I still can't get that man's face out of my head. It's just something you can't unsee. I stayed at that job for a month later before landing a new one that paid more and didn't require night shifts. I've never seen or heard from that man again, and I really hope it stays that way. While all of this was indeed a scary situation, one question still comes up that I can't seem to figure out the answer to. The store had several cameras that had night vision, and not one of them picked up the man by the exit, even though they were pointed at it. The police and I reviewed the footage and saw no one in the store, other than me. That was the reason as to what made me so scared, and it's also the reason why I will never work another night shift again. This took place in 2012 at a 7-Eleven gas station when I was a junior in college. I attended a community college in New York. Not the city, just the state itself. The reason I chose this school was to make it easier for me to transfer to the university I originally wanted. However, every college student knows that college isn't free and can definitely leave you with a large debt in your bank account. I received federal aid from state, but there was still a lot of tuition that I had to pay for. Because of this, I ended up getting a full-time job at a 7-Eleven working as a gas station attendant. It wasn't the best paying job, but it paid enough to help me get by while also paying off school. I've done tons of under-the-table stuff like a bouncer, a cleaner at bars, but I was really surprised that I was working this hard. For reference, I'm a male, and I was 20 at the time of the story. I had mostly worked night shifts, which I didn't mind doing as these were the shifts where you'd commonly have to deal with less people. 10 p.m. was around the time where you'd stop getting customers and traffic would start to die down. Anything past 10 p.m. was your occasional customers coming in for a late night snack or something. I'd say my shifts went relatively well until a night where I had to cover for someone who called in sick. It was annoying to say the least, but I realized it's a bigger paycheck at the end of the day. When working the night shift, we had to go ahead and shut the front door, turn off all of the lights, and operate from the window box. It was a quiet night with little to no cars on the road, and I had just gotten done wiping the counter. With nothing to do, I go behind the counter and decide to play some Sudoku to pass the time when I look out the window and saw a man by the gas pumps. He looked somewhat normal, although a bit lanky, and seemed to have taken an interest in the gas pumps for some reason. He wore a black long-sleeved shirt, cargo pants, and, out of all things, was carrying an empty Macy's bag. He casually walked around the pumps as if he were inspecting them. I wasn't sure what he was doing, but I kept a close eye on him. It also came to my attention that this man didn't have a car, nor did he arrive in one. It was almost as if he just walked up to the gas station. After all, this was located in an area that was notorious to druggies and meth heads, so I guess it wasn't all that uncommon. About a minute later, he proceeds to walk up to the window and says he needs pump 3. He throws his card into the box thing and I pull it in. Our practice for this was that if they gave us their card, we'd let them pump as much gas as they wanted and swipe their card afterwards. We try to go above and beyond for our customers, but the policy sort of changed for obvious reasons. I then see him walk toward pump 3, confused as to what he was doing since I didn't see a car. What I saw him do next is something that chilled me to the bone where all I could do is just watch. He proceeds to take the gas pump and begins to pour all of the gasoline on the actual pump itself while making this insane laugh. At this point, I hit this little pager we have under the desk that alerts the police in case of a fire or robbery. 20-year-old me sees this man take out a lighter and attempts to ignite it. By some stupid luck, the lighter isn't working, and I'm crouched down by the counter praying the police make it in time before this place goes up in flames. These pumps are extremely flammable, and I knew that if he had managed to light it, that it would have been over. The more he tried to light the lighter, the more irritated he became, and that was when I hear the sound of police sirens approaching. They get out of their patrol cars and tase him on the spot before he could start up the lighter. I come running out of the gas station, nearly crying, knowing that if they had arrived any later, I'd probably be dead. Both police and the fire department arrived on scene where they were thankfully able to remove the gas. At that point, I fall to my knees, bawling my eyes out as my body hit the concrete of the gas station. I was comforted by police and was taken to a hospital to check if I was exposed to any hazardous chemicals. I obviously ended work early that night, but still got paid for what I was owed. A week later, I got laid off from 7-Eleven, but ended up getting a huge severance package to pay for school. I ended up getting a new job shortly after that, after my previous employer wrote a glowing recommendation letter for me. While something good did happen, this also had a major impact on my mental health as I had to get years of therapy. It's been 10 years now, and this incident is still brought up by my parents from time to time. I'm now in my early 30s and have a lovely wife and have moved past it. I urge anyone reading this to cherish the time you have, as you don't know what will be your last day. Had that man managed to spark that lighter, I wouldn't be writing this right now. The whole gas station would have exploded, and that's exactly what I thought was gonna happen. I still don't know what his intentions were or why he did what he did, but to be honest, I don't want to know. I'd like to think that he was on something, but maybe that's just because I'd rather not think of the alternative. I still think about how it would have turned out had the police arrived even a minute later.
I work in a fairly busy hospital downtown, in the NICU. I usually work at night, and I kid you not, this happened to me less than 5 minutes ago. I figured it would be a good idea to document this before I forget. It's also a way for me to have some sort of proof in case something comes of it. During orientation, we are taught to be observant for signs of a possible abductor. We were taught to look for oversized clothing, bags, and shifty behavior. Fortunately, I've never encountered a strange individual until just now. It's currently 2:59 a.m., and I've been sitting at the front desk since 11 p.m. I'm a nursing student, so I usually handle clerical work around the unit. I also monitor the cameras to ensure no one unauthorized is present. It's usually pretty quiet at night. However, I've already had a somewhat weird night, so this just adds a cherry on top of it. The NICU and most of the second floor is a secured unit. This means that in order to gain entrance, you have to pick up a phone that then rings at the desk. Usually it's parents wanting to see their babies or family members who are lost. It typically quiets down around 11 p.m., so no one usually comes in or out during my shift except for housekeeping. One of the security cameras is positioned so I can see who is picking up the first phone. I had been sitting here browsing Instagram when the phone rang. I glanced over at the phone, thinking it was a parent wanting an update or something of that sort. It took me a second to realize that it was the number for the first set of doors. I picked it up and looked over at the screen. There was a lady in baggy clothing with a sling on her arm. I answered the door, and she said she wanted to find her cousin, who had apparently been brought up from the emergency department. I asked for the last name, and she unintelligibly rambled off a Latino name that I only caught the first part of. Knowing that we did not have any new admissions, I told her we didn't have anyone by that name. I tried to get more information from her, and she again mentioned that her cousin had been brought up from the ED. In that case, I informed her that she should go to labor and delivery and speak to them. She hesitated and then said okay and walked away. I got a really weird feeling from her, so I checked the census to see if anyone was being assessed in L&D, and there wasn't. So either she was at the wrong hospital, or she wanted access to the unit for something more sinister than just seeing her cousin. I shrugged it off, thinking that if her cousin was in L&D, she would find her, and all would be well. About 5 minutes later, the same lady appeared in her extremely baggy clothing and her sling. The only difference was that this time, she was putting the sling on and using her injured hand to fumble with something in her oversized sweatshirt. She picked up the phone and once again requested entry to find her cousin, mentioning that L&D said they had no one by that name. I told her the exact same thing, insisting that she needed to contact her cousin and return to L&D. She became hostile for a moment, then hung up the phone. Whether or not she was trying to gain access to the unit for things that she shouldn't be doing, I'll never know. But creepy lady who looked like a baby snatcher, I hope we never meet again. I am a 6'7" male in Australia, and I'd like to think I'm a fairly tough and intimidating guy, but some of the stuff that used to go on at the mall I used to work the night shift for still gives me goosebumps to this day. So the mall I worked at was very, very large. Probably the largest in my state, I'd say. Up until about 8:30 p.m., it would still be quite busy. Only around 9:30 p.m. would we manage to usher all of the stragglers out, and only at about 11 p.m. would all of the business owners have left. My job was basically to patrol the mall and make sure no one was sticking around after the doors were closed during the night. We didn't have guns or batons, only a can of mace that was very rarely used. There were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding around trying to break into shops after dark, but they were normally far outnumbered by the 5 of us on shift at a time, and they would usually be intimidated by me or some of the other imposing members of security. This one night, though, things started getting really weird for me on the night shift. So I'd say it was about 2 o'clock, and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court, eating a sandwich. This was the only part of the mall that had any light at nighttime due to the skylight, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating, though, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading off from the food courts into some toilets. It sounded like a piece of metal dragging across the floor. I was immediately put on edge, and I flicked on my flashlight without a moment of hesitation. I can remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating a good 6 or 7 meters in front of me. As I got closer and closer to the end of the hall, the noise became louder and louder until I was at the end of the hallway, and there were the toilet doors to the left and right of me. I could tell the sound was coming from the female toilets, though. I gripped the handle and opened the door a tiny little crack. The noise was now very clear and had me not scared but confused. I yelled, "Who is in there?" The noise quickly stopped. I paused for a moment, listening hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear to God I could hear breathing, low male breathing. I shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio. "This is 1-3. I need help in the food court bathrooms. I think someone's here." There was no response. This was really strange, and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, and now I was truly becoming quite alarmed. "This is 1-3. Does anyone copy?" Still no response. I can remember whispering to myself. I again opened the door a tiny crack. "Listen, mate," I said, sounding as intimidating as possible. "If you don't come out with your hands up, you're going to end up eating your teeth tonight. Do you want that?" I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would someone be in the female bathrooms? What was the metal noise? I very slowly opened the door and scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All the cubicles were open, but other than that, the room was totally empty. I was totally terrified by now. I was definitely losing it. I walked into the center of the bathroom, closing the door behind me, scared to the core. I let out a faint, "This is some horror movie shit, come out," when I heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me. I spun around, basically crying at this point, and shone my flashlight on a massive man, at least a head taller than me, or so it seemed in my state at the time. He was Caucasian and at least in his 40s, with matte gray hair all over his forehead. He was mid-opening the door but stopped dead still in the middle of his action. He just looked at me, smiling this guilty smile like a kid would make when he gets caught stealing biscuits or something like that. I'm not going to lie, I was so scared I froze. He lifted his finger up to his mouth, "Shh," before swinging the door open all the way and sprinting out with what looked like some type of small metal box in his hand. Turns out he was just behind the toilet door when I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so close to him and didn't even notice him. He could have killed me if he had a knife or something, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Later that night, my radio miraculously started working again, and I told my coworkers about my story. They collectively went pale when I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, but none were as much of a close shave as mine. I worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I'm not sticking around in a job like that.
About a year ago, in my final semester in college, I worked at a Shaw's grocery store in Boston, Massachusetts. For those of you who don't know what Shaw's is, it's basically a grocery store that's mainly based in the Northeast. I didn't have a car yet, so I mainly requested for day shifts as I've always been skeptical of the night. It wasn't that I hated them, it was more so the fear of what could happen, especially to a petite 5'7" girl like me. However, sometimes I'd be given a closing shift, much to my annoyance, as I had a 7:45 a.m. class and we closed pretty late. Whenever I did have a closing shift, we'd end up closing at 10, and it's about an hour's bus ride back home. My managers, being the jerks that they were, gave me a week of closing shifts knowing my situation. I was pissed, but whatever. It's a few $100s added to my paycheck, so I couldn't argue with that. It was a Thursday night, and I had just finished stocking a few chips as we had just gotten an extra shipment. It was me, my manager, and another coworker running the register. It's about an hour before we close, and the store's pretty much dead except for a few customers. I finish putting the chips on the shelves and get ready to clock out. Before doing so, my manager had told me to go outside and bring the shopping carts that were in the parking lot to the store. Living in a decent-sized city, it wasn't uncommon for careless people to leave their carts out in the open. As I'm grabbing a cart beside a car, a woman rolls down her window and says hello. With a friendly smile, I say hello back and asked if I could help her. In the car was a mom and what appeared to be her teenage daughter in the front seat. Right away, the mom seemed concerned, looking back and forth before telling me that they needed gas. I tell her there was a gas station just down the road, but she then interrupts me, asking if I could give her money for gas. She's explaining as to how she just came from another state and was in desperate need. Being a dirt poor college student, I barely made enough to pay for my own tuition. However, I didn't want to decline help to someone in need, so I take out my wallet and hand her a $5 bill. She stares down at the money and then back at me as if she wanted more when she said that it wasn't enough. I told her I was sorry and that was all I had. She then says in a more direct tone if I could get into her car and go down to the gas station to help her get gas. As I was about to respond, that's when I noticed the teenage daughter had been staring at me the whole time. She's sitting in the seat, giving me this dead stare while licking her lips as if she were planning on something. That was my cue to get out of there as something wasn't right. Thankfully, my manager had come out, and when he saw the car, it immediately pulled out of the parking lot and drove off. I remember running up to him and thanking him for noticing. He also knew something was wrong as he could definitely see the fear and panic of my face. My manager took a picture of the car and was able to identify the year and model of it. I worked at that Shaw's for a good year after that and never saw that car again.
For a little backstory, this all took place when COVID-19 had shut everything down in March 2020. I was sent home from my college and I had to deal with Zoom classes, and I also went back to work at the burger joint that I would work at whenever I was home on breaks. I won't say the name of the place, but it was always very busy, and during COVID it made us even busier due to us being a fast food place, so we never had to close down, but other places in the plaza did. We always had some really crazy and nasty people, but the pandemic just made everyone so much worse. At the time, we had this one regular that would come in who we thought had some mental problems multiple times a week. He would be really emotionless in his talking and just gave really blank dead stares towards everyone, and just stood there like a gargoyle, really intimidating and statuesque. He would ride his bike up to the walk-up area and look through the sliding windows until one of us got to taking his order. But he only really liked certain people to take his order and was also very cold towards us. He would order the same thing every time, but wants it fresh right out of the grease and handled by once again only certain people. And to make sure of it, he'll intensely stare at us through the pickup window. He would make the other customers outside so uncomfortable that they would walk away or they would just sit in their cars until he left. He used to only come in during the day shifts, but because days were much busier than the night shifts, and with all his demands that he would give us every time, my manager got fed up and told him to no longer come here during the day, thus now making him a night shift problem. During the week, I would work night shifts because of class, and I would usually be clocking out by 10 p.m. It was around 9:30 and I was closing my side down and starting to clean when he then rolled up on his bike. I happened to be one of the few people he let take his order, so as usual I took his order. He wants everything completely fresh, the standard list of demands. But one demand he gave was new. He always orders a side of fries with his meal, and sometimes to put the fries in the carton we either use a scooper or tongs. He asked us to use the scooper instead of the tongs because it'll give him more fries. Me just wanting him to leave and being close to leaving myself, I just went over and told the fry guy what he wanted. The fry guy just rolled his eyes, knowing how annoying this guy is, and dropped some new fries in the grease for him. The fry guy went on a break shortly after, and the night manager took over a station and waited for the fries to be ready. She didn't know it was this guy though, and she used the tongs to put the fries in the carton. She then hands me the order to pass out. The guy slides open the window, and he told me that she didn't do what he asked and that he wants more fries in his bag, since it looked like she didn't put enough in, which she put plenty in. He just didn't get his way. Once again, just wanting to leave after I'm done with him, I just oblige and go back. My coworker, who I'm going to call E, calls back and says that I shouldn't let him do that. I then called back saying that we've been letting him control us for months, and it's not my problem to handle a manager's problem if he has issues. My night manager hears this and sees it's the guy at the window. They then groan and they ask me what the issue is with him this time. I explained her the story and she went up to him and told him that it makes no difference what she does. He's getting his order fresh every single time by the people he wants to make his order, so to just suck it up and take the bag. She hands him the bag and then storms in the back to finish her inventory. The guy then pokes his arm and head in the window and tries to get one of the other coworkers to remake his order. Coworker and I both said that we're not going to do that since there was nothing even wrong with his food. Well, he doesn't like this, and he actually throws his bag of food inside the store and spills it all over the floor. He sees this and absolutely loses it. She runs over to the window that he's still in and then screams at him how he can't disrespect us like this, and that we for sure won't be remaking his order now, but we'll give him his money back. He then screams at her, and they actually go at it for a few minutes. I call up the night manager, and she runs up to also scream at him. As he gives the guy back his money, he actually grabs her arm and then yanks her almost through the window. Now, because of the pandemic, we have these plastic dividers at the top of where the customer would be speaking to. So if that wasn't there, she would have went straight through the window. Now everyone is screaming at this guy to get the hell out of there and that we're calling the cops as he just assaulted a minor. Earlier that week, he had racial slurs screamed at her by a bunch of rednecks because she was black. I felt really bad for her dealing with two big issues that happened in such a short period of time. She broke out of his grasp and ran to the back. The guy didn't even leave. In his crazy, twisted mind, he thought he was in the right here. He was running in circles outside of our walk-up area and was actually screaming to himself about E and how he's gonna set the cops on us. He tries banging on the windows to further get our attention, but we just ignored him. 4 cop cars drove in, blocking the entrance and the exit of the drive-thru so that no one can come in or leave. They talked to him and the guy just isn't grasping that he attacked a minor and he's crazy. The owner of the company sends in the security footage of just what happened to the cops, and we set the guy on trespassing. The guy actually had to be escorted off the property because he wouldn't leave. He thankfully hasn't come in since that day, but we still see him riding around the road next to our place, and he gives us menacing looks every time he passes by, not once breaking eye contact. He really wasn't right in the head. The dead stares he would give us through the windows, the emotionless way he would speak to us, how picky he was with everything, and how quick he snapped and resorted to violence. It was insane. Very fortunately, E didn't get any injuries from the incident and was only shaken up, but she did quit a few weeks later, and I can't really blame her. I feel really bad for her. No one should ever have to deal with being assaulted by customers or having racial slurs spewed at them. She was way too young to have to deal with that.
I used to work at a McDonald's when I was in high school. I'm a female and worked there for less than a year, but I have several stories of crazy experiences. One in particular happened about a month after I started working there. I was working behind the front counter, taking customers' orders. It was in the afternoon, probably at like 5 p.m. Usually, it was decently busy at this time, but would get crazier and crazier until about 7. There were a few people in line, and I took all of their orders. Then there was this one man who approached me at the counter. Instead of ordering food, he asked for my phone number. I was taken aback by this, but said no to the man. I did not want to give him my number at all. The man then just angrily walked off. He seemed to be really upset about it and didn't even order anything. Although I had only spoken with him and seen him for less than a minute, the guy seemed like a creep. I went on with work as things were pretty busy. For the next several hours, I was kept really busy and things finally started to quiet down a while later at like 8 p.m. Finally, there was no line of customers and things were calm. That's when I saw somebody walk in and noticed that it was the same man from before. He walked up to the counter again and I was a little bit nervous. The man then said sorry to me and apologized for earlier. I told him that it was all right and then asked if he would like to order some food. But he didn't. He said that he didn't mean to get angry and walk away earlier, and then once again asked me for my number. I told him sorry, but no. I said that I did not feel comfortable giving my number out. The man asked me to hang out with him and get to know him a bit. I told him no thanks and that I was busy working. He then asked me what time I got off. I just said later. The man then turned to looking very angry once again. He stormed out of the McDonald's, saying something under his breath that I couldn't make out. For the rest of my shift, I did not see him. I got off and went home. The next time that I worked was on Saturday. I started during the busy afternoon and was once again working at the front counter. A couple of hours in, we were pretty busy when I happened to catch out of the corner of my eye the man again. He was entering, and I dreaded him getting in line and asking me for my number. But he didn't get in line. The man walked towards the back of the restaurant and just sat down at a table. I noticed him looking at me, and I looked away and focused on what I was doing. Like I said, things were pretty busy, so I easily distracted myself with taking customers' orders. And for the next few hours, I forgot about him. That is, until I looked up once and saw that he was still there. I was just hoping that he wouldn't get in line to order. I continued work and did my best to ignore the man sitting there. A few more hours went by, and when I looked up again, I didn't see him. He was finally gone. He also hadn't come up to order anything as I was working, which I was happy about. Things were quiet for the last hour or two, and then I was finally off. I clocked out and left the McDonald's for the night. It was dark out now, and I walked to my car in the parking lot. Not long after making it outside, though, I heard footsteps coming from the other direction. I looked over and saw the guy again. He was walking towards me at a fast pace. I turned and started running to my car. The man started running as well. I realized that I wasn't going to make it. When I got to my car, I quickly reached in my pocket for the pepper spray that I always kept on me. As soon as the man reached me, I sprayed him right in the face. He moved back and grabbed at his eyes. This allowed me to easily get in my car. I called the police and then drove away. Long story short, I did not see the man again after that. I'm also really glad that I had my pepper spray on me that night. For some background on this story, I'm a female and live with my roommate in an apartment complex. We are both terrible at cooking and I order McDonald's all the time, probably way more than I should, but I like it so much. Plus, they're open really late at night and it's very convenient. I'm often up late from work as well. So there's something that happened like 2 months ago. Whenever I ordered McDonald's, I would use the mobile app and then go and pick it up. A few times I had it delivered, but most of the time I go get it. The McDonald's is only like a 2 or 3 minute drive from my place. I would say I get it like twice a week on average. One night, it was really late, like 11 p.m., and I ordered some food from McDonald's for my roommate and I. I use the app like always, and I get free stuff all the time because of it. So I left our place by myself, and I got to the McDonald's a short time later. It was very quiet, but there were a few other people there. After going inside, I made it to the shelf where they have mobile orders that you can pick up. I found my name and picked up the bag and then left. I drove back home, and after getting back in my place, opened it up. It had all of the food, but then had something else that was really strange. It was a note that was handwritten, and I had no clue why it was in there. I read it out of curiosity and realized that it had my name on top of it. This is what the note said. "Hey, I see you get McDonald's a lot. Sometimes I watch you pick it up. You are truly beautiful. Do you eat all alone? Because I would like to join you." I thought this had to either be a joke or some really creepy guy. I showed it to my roommate and we were both not sure. My best guess was that it was an employee, but I really had no clue. I never noticed anybody watching me when I got it. I felt like I probably shouldn't go back there for a while. But only a few days later, I completely forgot. I ordered McDonald's again late at night. This time, I was by myself and my roommate was gone. It wasn't until after I had ordered it and I was leaving to pick it up that I remembered what had happened before. I was a little bit nervous about it, but I decided to go. I left my apartment and drove to the McDonald's. When I got there, I went inside and looked all around. I didn't notice anybody watching me or anything like that. I picked up my order and then walked back to my car. When I got inside, I checked inside the bag for another note. Then I saw it. There was another one and I read it. The note said, "Mind if I join you tonight?" I looked around the parking lot and didn't see anything strange, so I left. This was really weird. I was checking in my mirror, but nobody followed me or anything. When I got back to my place, I looked over my shoulder until I had made it inside. Then I finally felt safe. I sat down on my couch and started to eat, but that's when I heard a knock at my door. Instantly, my heart started racing. I didn't know who it could be. I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing there. He was average height, sort of thin, and had brown spiky hair. I didn't know what to do. Then I heard him say my name on the other side of the door. He asked me if I was home. I didn't answer him. Instead, I called the police and told them that some guy was stalking me. I went into my bedroom and barely heard him knocking again. I closed the door and waited, hoping that this guy wouldn't try to come inside. He didn't, and eventually the police met him outside of my door. He was told to leave me alone, and I haven't seen him since. I also have not ordered at that McDonald's for a while. The guy did in fact work there, but he was not working on the night that he went to my apartment. I still can't believe that all happened. It was just a really crazy situation, and I'm hoping that I don't see that guy again. I went to McDonald's one night after a long day of work. It was probably like 10 p.m. and I was really hungry. Of course, you can always rely on there being a McDonald's open and just about everywhere. The location that I went to was on the way home from my job in a commercial area. There were a few other stores nearby and some other restaurants as well, but most businesses in the area were closed at this hour. The streets and nearby parking lots were pretty empty. I pulled into the McDonald's parking lot and only noticed a couple of other cars. I got out and walked inside to order a Big Mac. When I entered the restaurant, I saw that nobody else was in there. I walked up to the counter and an employee said hi to me. Then I ordered the number 1, which is a Big Mac meal, and then waited. I filled my drink and then stood around. Within probably 2 minutes, my order was ready, and I picked it up and left. I headed out for my car to drive the remaining 5 or 10 minutes back to my place. Then I could finally eat. I was so hungry. But as I made it out into the parking lot, I realized that a car was parked next to mine. I drive a Chevy Silverado pickup truck, and the car parked next to me appeared to be a Ford Escape, which is an SUV. It was a little bit older one though, probably like 2010 or so. And in the entire parking lot, there were so many other spaces for them to park, but they parked right next to me on my driver's side. As I got even closer, I noticed that not only were they parked next to me, but they were parked so close that I couldn't even get in. They were probably within 3 feet of my car, so I couldn't get in my driver's door. I could also see that their car was running and somebody was inside. I didn't want to bother telling them to move, so I just walked around to my passenger side where I had plenty of space. I was pretty annoyed about it though. I unlocked my car, got in, and then had to climb over the front passenger seat to the driver's seat. As I did this, I looked over at the car next to me. Somebody was in the front driver's seat and somebody else was in the front passenger seat. The thing that stood out right away was that they were both wearing these creepy clown masks. I figured it was teenagers trying to be funny or something. I might have laughed if I wasn't so tired and hungry and just wanted to get home. When I got in my driver's seat, I started my engine. But when I did, I realized that the person right next to me in the passenger seat of the other car was rolling down their window. I looked over, wondering what they were going to do, and I did not roll my window down. But the guy in the front passenger seat then reached down and pulled out what looked like a crowbar. I was really confused. Without saying anything, the guy swung it at my driver's window. He hit it pretty solid, but the window did not break. It really took me by surprise, but right after he did that, I put my truck in reverse. I slammed on the gas and backed out of there before the guy had a chance to swing again. Almost immediately after I backed out, the guys next to me did too. It looked like they were going to try to follow me. I drove out of the McDonald's parking lot and back onto the busier street as fast as I possibly could. The bigger street was luckily very quiet at this hour. I cut the corner pretty close, but made it. I could hear tires screeching from the car behind me. The guys chasing me were driving so recklessly that they cut the corner way too close. McDonald's had some rocks and bushes for scenery and landscaping, and these guys drove their SUV right into the rocks. It wasn't that bad of a crash at all, but it was enough to get them stuck, and they couldn't drive out of it. I could see the guys then getting out of their car as I was driving off. I was able to get away, and I called the police and reported the incident. After that, I went home. I'm glad that those guys ran into the rock, or they likely would have chased me for a while. Looking back at that incident, I don't know what caused it. I have no idea why they chose me or how. I thought maybe they had followed me from work, but I didn't notice them before. I feel like it was just a random attack. Hopefully those guys don't do anything like that again. This is something that happened a long time ago when I was really young. I don't remember it all that clearly, but I will do my best to tell the story. I think I was probably about 6 or 7 during this time. My family went to McDonald's occasionally. It was a very popular fast food chain with us, and one thing that my sister and I really liked was the Happy Meals. You would get a small toy with your Happy Meal, and it was really fun as a kid. I remember that one night I went there with my parents and older sister. We got there, ordered, and then went to a booth that was kind of on the side of the restaurant away from the counter. You couldn't see the front registers from where we were. After we all sat down, my dad went up to get the food and returned with it a short time later. My sister and I opened up our Happy Meals first and looked at our toys. Then we started to eat. For some reason, back then, I liked to eat chicken nuggets with a fork. It was just something that I thought was cool. So I got up and walked over to the counter on my own to grab a fork. I assumed that they would be right next to the straws and things like that. Meanwhile, the restaurant was not packed, but actually kind of busy. I remember there were some people ordering, and some others sitting all around at tables and booths. So when I got over to the drink machines, I looked around but couldn't find any forks. They had straws, ketchup, and sugar packets, but no utensils. I was looking all around that counter, focused on trying to find them. That's when suddenly someone grabbed my wrist. They had a tight grasp on me and began walking towards the door. There were 2 entrances to this McDonald's. One was on the right of the counter and the other was on the left. The one on the left was literally right behind the drink machines. I looked up and saw this woman who I had never seen before. She was scolding me and telling me not to wander off. I was really confused and thought maybe this woman thought I was her kid or something. The next thing I knew, we were walking out the doors. We got past the first set of doors and were in the small space between the next doors, which led to outside. There was a man in that small area who I guess was with the woman. He told me to come on and then reached out for my other hand. This is when my instincts started to kick in. A little bit late, but not too late. There was no way that I was going to leave with these people. I did what I had to do. I stomped on the woman's foot as hard as I could. This caused her to let me go. The man then reached out for me, but I just barely got away. I felt him grabbing for my arm and almost getting a grip, but he didn't. I got back in the restaurant and sprinted over to my parents. When they saw me come running, they told me to slow down and asked me what the matter was. I told them about what had happened. It caused a whole big scene. The police were called, and they were at the restaurant for a while talking with everyone. The man and woman had gotten away, and I gave as much of a description as I could, but it probably wasn't that great. To be honest, I never got all that good of a look at them, and it all happened so fast. I couldn't tell you what they looked like today, but looking back on that, I'm very thankful that I was able to get away from them. I used to work at a McDonald's. This is something that happened during that time. I worked there during my senior year in high school. I was saving up money to buy my own car, and during that time drove my parents' old car. Most of the times that I worked were at nights because I had school during the day. I was a part-time employee who would get like 20 hours a week, if that. So one time, I was working from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. When I got there, things were pretty busy. At one point, in kind of a break in the action when things were quieter, a man walked in and approached me. I was working at the front register and taking orders. The man did not order anything, but asked if I could come out into the parking lot and help jump his car. I found this to be a really odd request. Obviously, I was busy working, and I didn't know why he asked me specifically. I told him that I was sorry, but I could not. The man then told me that it would be really fast, and then I could get back inside. I said that I didn't know much about cars, because I didn't. I wasn't even sure how to jump a car. The guy told me that he would show me, and said that it was very easy. I suggested that he call his roadside service or something. The guy started to explain to me that he couldn't, but I interrupted him. I said, "Look man, I'm not going to leave here. I have to work. Sorry." The guy looked disappointed, but finally walked away. He then went somewhere in the back of the restaurant and sat down at a table or something. I thought maybe he was going to start asking random customers to help them jump his car. I get needing a jump, but to ask an employee who is clearly at work is really weird. For the next few minutes, I was busy working and didn't pay attention to where the man went or anything. But a while later, I happened to notice him out the window. From where I was, I could kind of see out into the parking lot and some of the spaces. I saw the guy getting into a car, which was an older-looking gray sedan, and just moments later, he drove away. I was glad that he was able to get it started and leave. I worked for the next few hours and was very busy with customers until probably 8 o'clock or so. Then things quieted down significantly, and it also became dark outside. I kept working until 9 o'clock and then finally was off and could leave. When I got off, I left McDonald's and walked out to my car in the parking lot. I parked kind of on the side of the building at the end that was a little bit out of the way. As I was walking, I saw the silver car again. The man then got out of it and started approaching me. I had to walk past him to get to my car. My heart sank. He asked me again if I could help jump his car. Immediately, I said to the man, "I thought you left." The guy said no, he had been there all night. I said that I thought I saw him driving away, but the man denied it. This was very weird. The man asked me again if I could help jump his car. I said sorry, but no. I told the man that I really didn't know anything about vehicles, and I didn't even know how to jump a car. He seemed really set on me helping jumpstart his car, but I was really set on not doing it because it seemed way too sketchy. The man then asked me to just come over to his car and that he would show me. I kept walking away from him and said sorry, but no. That's when the man started walking closer to me. He was walking sort of fast, and I decided to start running. I sprinted all the way to my car and then got inside. The man actually started running after me. When I got inside my car, the guy got to my front driver's door and tried opening it, but it was locked. He was saying, wait, don't go." I ignored him and backed out. Then I drove away, leaving the man standing in the parking lot. Something was definitely suspicious about him. I had literally seen him driving away, and I think it was some type of a setup. I'm not sure if he was trying to kidnap me or rob me or what. All I know is that I'm really glad I got away. I called my manager at the McDonald's on the way home and told her about the suspicious guy in the parking lot. I'm not sure how she handled it or if he left, but hopefully the guy did not cause any more problems. That was my scariest experience from working at McDonald's.
When I was 16, my family and I lived in an apartment complex in a rural area outside of Chicago. Chicago was a really busy city, and neither of us liked crowded places, which is why we chose to live in a more secluded area. I had only one friend at the time named Tyler, who was just a little older than me, but still fun to hang out with. He lived a few doors down from me, and oftentimes we'd go over to each other's places and play video games and whatnot. One night, Tyler, his girlfriend Maria, and I had just seen the new Avengers movie, one of the best films in 2019 in my opinion. Since the movie ended late, most places were closed by now, and we were more hungry than ever. With no other option, we decided to hit up our local McDonald's to go grab a bite. It's not the best food to have, but we were still high school teens and we didn't have a lot of money. So we go in, order our food, and find a table immediately. Like I said, it was well into the night, so finding a table was easy. Tyler and Maria sat next to each other like all couples do and shared their food while I sat in front of them. While we were talking about school and stuff, I glanced behind Tyler and his girlfriend and noticed a man sitting down with nothing on his table. He's scrolling through his phone and looks up at me, and we make eye contact for a brief second before he starts to talk with Tyler and Maria. I then see him get up and start heading towards us, and I thought, great, probably another guy wanting money for drugs. He approaches our table and starts asking us if we could help him unload a few things from his car. Seeing as we were about done with our meals, we agreed to help him as we were a nice group of teens and Tyler and I were both pretty strong. We leave the McDonald's and head out into the parking lot, approaching his van, when suddenly Tyler looks at his phone and apologizes, telling us that we had to go. The man looks at us, confused, insisting that we help him out, but Tyler ignores him and walks off with us until we were far away from the restaurant. I asked Tyler what had happened. He looked petrified and told me that when he was approaching the van, he could very faintly see two men wearing masks looking through the window. So, I've been working at what is considered to be the world's largest McDonald's chain in Orlando, Florida. To give you an idea as to how big the establishment is, we have a large play place, a whole dining area the size of a cafeteria, and a large kitchen. It sounds like your typical McDonald's, but it's a lot bigger than you think. Anyway, I had been working the late night shift from around 6 to 12 p.m. as I was still in college and had classes during the day. So the night shift was the only time I had been available to work. One night at around 11:30 p.m., I was finishing up my shift and we were getting ready to close, which meant that we weren't allowing any more customers. I had to use the restroom one last time before I ended my shift, and when I went into the women's restroom, I noticed that the lights were extremely dim. After all, the lights hadn't been replaced in forever, so I did my business when it started to become ridiculously cold. It was the middle of summer and the temperature was 70 last time I checked. Then, what happened next is something that will never leave me. A loud bang came from the stall over, and I instantly went pale. As I'm unlocking the stall door, I hear a faint giggle from the stall over. I didn't even dream of looking into that stall. I ran out of that restroom so fast, only to end up freaking out about it to my manager. My manager went into the restroom and opened up all the stalls, but she didn't find anyone. I'm still convinced that till this day, that I was not alone in that restroom.
when I was about 10 years old. I lived in the city, not too far from a McDonald's. I remember one day I convinced my mom to let me go there alone to get some food. She was busy with something and gave me a few dollars and told me to come back quickly. I was excited, and it made me feel like a grown-up to go out on my own. I had done it several times before, and it wasn't a daily thing, but here and there I would. So I left, and I made my way to the McDonald's. It took me about 10 minutes to walk there. After leaving our house, I only had to walk to the end of the street, then cross a busy one. Then I went down a ways before the McDonald's was on the right side. As I approached the restaurant, a sudden urge to use the bathroom hit me. When I got inside, I saw that the place wasn't very busy, and I walked over to the bathrooms to use it before ordering. When I got inside the bathroom, nobody else was in there. I went into a stall, but only about a minute later, I heard the bathroom door open and close. This was followed by footsteps, but the footsteps didn't go in far. They seemed to stop just inside the door, and I thought this was kind of weird. I kept expecting them to walk further in, but they didn't. After about a minute, I ducked down and looked underneath the bathroom stall that I was in. I saw black shoes and the bottom of some black pants. They were standing right in front of the door. I wanted to leave, but I would have to walk past the person, so I decided to wait. As I sat in the bathroom stall, I couldn't believe how or why this person was standing there for so long. I decided that I was going to stay in the bathroom stall until they left. Eventually, after probably 10 more minutes, I heard the door open and the person walk out. I felt much better. The whole thing seemed really strange to me. Finally, I was able to leave the bathroom stall, and after I walked out of the bathroom, I looked around the restaurant. There still weren't very many people in there. However, not long after leaving the restrooms, as I was making my way over to order, I saw one man who was sitting in the corner of the restaurant. I noticed his black shoes and pants, and I realized this was more than likely the same guy. I hurried up and went to the counter to order, and I did not see the man as I did. After ordering, it didn't take long at all for me to get my food, and I then left the restaurant to walk home. I began making my way back along the sidewalk, but before making it more than 2 minutes, I had a bad feeling. I looked back, and sure enough, the same guy was trailing me. He was a little ways back and not right up on me, but it still made me really nervous. Could he be following me? This was the same man who had just been standing inside the bathroom door for so long. I kept looking back every so often, and the man was always behind me. When I started walking faster intentionally, the guy definitely did the same thing. I was now getting really worried. What if this guy followed me all the way back to my house? And what if he ran up behind me and tried to grab me or something before I could get home? As I approached the busy street to wait at the crosswalk before crossing, I had to stop. The man would probably catch up to me before I would make it across the street. That's when I decided to just go for it. I started sprinting across the road, with many cars still on it. I felt confident that I could make it and would not be hit by a car, but nevertheless, multiple cars honked at me as I ran. But luckily, I did make it across safely. I looked back and saw the man starting to run out into the street as well, but a car quickly approached and honked at him. He backed up and stayed on the other side. I used this opportunity to run up into my street and out of sight of the man. I ran the whole rest of the way home and made it back a short time later. After making it home, I told my mom all about the experience. And as a result, I was not allowed to go anywhere on my own for a while, but I didn't mind a bit. I was worried that the man would have somehow found out where we lived, and I worried about that for weeks, but luckily, I don't believe he did, because I never saw him again after that.
A little over a year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station close to my house. I'm a woman and was 31 at the time. I know, to some, it seems unsafe for a woman to work graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store, and the sheriff's office was only 20 feet across from it. There would be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on a busy night. It was 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot and do a last-minute check of the trash. It was time for a cigarette. I had one headphone in and was just kind of jamming out. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, to me, it looked like he was enjoying a much-needed piss. Against the sheriff's office, though? Yeah, that building closed up at 4 p.m. Didn't open up again until 6 the next morning. But why there? By the back of his ripped white t-shirt, I remembered that he had come in about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep, and I could already tell he had a good buzz going. I didn't say anything. I just took my eyes off of him and tried not to draw any more attention to myself. It was working until a car pulled in. I was still outside as that car pulled up. I saw that man glance over at the car, then at me, back and forth once more. As that same customer who pulled up was leaving, I walked back outside. I still had half a smoke burning and had left my dustpan outside with the squeegee. We both heard him start to swear angrily, seemingly engage in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful. I made some kind of awkward joke about him being the one who should worry and not me. Something like that. The man was still out there, but closer to the road now, facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he was yelling was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk and can barely stand straight, still swaying away. I did not engage with him, but I didn't take my eyes off of him. I just slowly walked back into the store. Something about that man's face just really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, and his eyes looked completely wild. My experience working graveyard shift has told me that the crazy-eyed ones are always the worst ones and the ones to look out for. I didn't like it at all, and I wanted no part of it. I looked up at the clock. I still had 3 hours to go, and 2 hours before any other employee got there. Instantly, I went to the computer and typed up a temporary close sign, just in case he wanted some kind of trouble. I was coming around the corner on my way to the doors. When I glanced up, I saw that he was no longer on the opposite side of the road. He was on my side now. I literally had just barely gotten the second door locked when he stumbled into our very small parking lot. I took my hand and mimed the hand signal for a cut across my neck, conveying to him that, nope, sorry, you can't come in here, we're closed, and shook my head back and forth, hoping to further discourage him. He started walking away but screamed something at me while he was walking. And I don't mean he was grumpy and shouted at me or yelled that I was an asshole or anything. I mean like he was an enraged volume and was violently throwing his hands everywhere. I decided to call the cops, and it was a good thing I did too, because the minute I hung up with him, he came up directly to the doors. He starts banging and pulling on them. Then he backs up and tries to ram them. I yelled out, telling him that I had the cops on the way and his ass was about to be grass. Once I said that, he took off. Once the police got there, they drove around the road and surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour, but found no one. He was on foot, so I don't know where he could have gone to. Thankfully, I wasn't harmed during this entire event, and because the police didn't find anyone, I didn't fill out a police report or anything. I was safe behind those thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I wouldn't have to spend the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I'll never really know what the right choice was. I'm just glad that I don't work there anymore. I've posted this on Reddit a few times, but here it is again, just because it fits. Back in the early 90s, I worked for Domino's Pizza, and during this time I was an assistant manager, but occasionally we would have to deliver too. On this night, it was just after 11 p.m. I made a delivery to a house in one of our middle-income neighborhoods. As I pull up to the house, there isn't any lights on. If the porch light wasn't on, we're supposed to go to a payphone and call the number on the order. That was to prevent robberies. I never did that. I would just go ahead and go up to the door. But on this night, I sat in my car for a minute. For some reason, I just had this gut feeling, and I always listen to my gut. So I drove back 2 blocks to a payphone and called the number. It was disconnected. I decided to wait just a minute before making the second call that we were supposed to make. If they didn't answer the second time, we were just supposed to go back to the store. As I stood there, I noticed a Pizza Hut driver, but I didn't really think anything of it in the moment. You spot each other while on the road, you know. I called back a third time, still disconnected, and for some reason, I decided to return to the house and just see if someone comes to the door. When I get back, I realize the Pizza Hut car is sitting in the driveway, and I think to myself, what the hell? I turn in the long driveway that is lined on the left side by tall evergreen trees and those shrub things. I immediately notice that there's something big on the ground next to the open door of that Pizza Hut driver's car. I pull up behind him and park, When I get out, I realize it's the driver. Okay, so he must have had a heart attack or something, right? I run up to him to see what I can do to help. When I get up to him, I realize that his skull has been caved in so bad that I can actually see some brain. I immediately run back to my car and lock the door. I drive like 90 miles per hour those 2 blocks to the payphone and call the police. Then call my store and tell them what's going on. And also have them call Pizza Hut. I wait for the cops to come and go back. Eventually, the detective comes over to talk to me. He tells me that in the first of the bushes next to the driveway, they found a realty sign. The power is off. The house is completely empty. They also found 2 sets of footprints in the bushes. It appears they ordered pizza from both places and waited to see whoever got there first to rob them. I was first, but I didn't get out of my car, so they had to wait on Pizza Hut to show up. If I had been the one to get out of my car that first time, it would be me laying on the ground dead. For some reason, my gut feeling perhaps, I didn't do what I normally did. I never knocked on another door without a front porch light on, unless I knew that customer really, really well. I used to work at a coffee place. We opened up at 5 in the morning, but we were there at 4:30 to set up. We closed at 8 p.m. and left by 8:30 or 9, depending on when we finished up cleaning. One night a week was the deep cleaning sessions. We'd have to leave closer to 9:30 or 10. I did my fair share of both opening and closing in almost my 4 years there. Definitely saw some pretty interesting folks in all that time, especially when opening. Lots of homeless people who were sadly mentally disabled or drug addicted. We were in a part of town that was not as nice as it used to be. One morning when I was opening, myself and the opening barista, I was the supervisor at the time, we were the only ones in the store. I was in the back of the store setting up some tills, and she was in the front brewing coffee and tea and so on. Suddenly, she starts screaming bloody murder. I grabbed a box cutter and ran to the front. She'd been cleaning a drain on the ground by the sink right next to the drive-through window. She had been bent down, but when she stood up again, a man's face was pressed up against the window, literally inches away from her face just through the glass. He was just staring at her with this huge, super terrifying grin, super dirty and messy, and for some reason, had a pink blanket wrapped around his shoulders. As my barista began screaming and crying, mostly shocked from how quickly he'd randomly appeared and how close he was to her, he started cackling. It was funny to him. I don't really know why, but it pissed me off. I didn't open up the window, obviously. I just told her to go back into the back of the store and then made eye contact with that guy to the window and scowled as hard as I could, pointed down the street, and yelled, "Off now!" He looked taken aback at first, but then kind of just stumbled down the street. He lingered on the block for a long time, but eventually left for good. I kept an eye on him for a while, then went back and tried to calm down the barista. Another time I was opening with a different barista. For reference, I'm an average-sized female in her early 20s. The barista that was opening up with me was in his late 30s, and was a male. When we opened the store, we'd wait in the parking lot for another person to get there. One barista, one supervisor, and then walk into the store together. I arrived before him, and when he got there, he parked a few spaces away from me. His car is black and small, so it could be kind of hard to notice in the dark and when it was a ways away. When I realized he was there, I got out of my car to meet him. He left his car too, and was walking towards me when he suddenly just starts yelling, "Get the f*** away from her!" and then running super fast at me. I heard footsteps run away from behind me, and I was just completely shocked. Apparently someone had been hiding behind my car, waiting for me to get out. They hadn't noticed my coworker show up and was scared off by him, thank God. So I didn't even notice that anyone was there. A few weeks later, when I was closing with a different barista, my barista's partner was picking her up from work that night and was waiting in the parking lot since she got there a little early. Luckily, the barista's partner was also a cop. She noticed someone was crouching behind my car and called her partner to tell her to tell me what was going on, then went to investigate and shoo the guy away. As soon as he saw her, he ran away again. My barista and her partner both walked me to my car, just to be safe. So yeah, 2 separate attempted kidnappings within 2 weeks was pretty creepy. All for $15 an hour.
A couple of years ago, I worked at a gas station. It was a pretty small town, about 2 hours north of where I was from. I was living there temporarily while I worked on flipping the house I owned. I worked on the house during the day, and I would work at the gas station on nights to help pay for it. The gas station was right off of a major freeway, and we would get lots of people passing through town. One night, I was working a 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. shift. I didn't mind these shifts because they would not be very busy, and I always found things to do. Most of the time, I would be the only one working for a majority of the shift. On this night, there was a decent amount of people coming through for the first few hours, and at about 1 a.m., things really started to quiet down. I mopped the floors and then went back behind the counter. Then, I noticed a car pulling into the station. It was a regular black car and looked pretty normal, except for when it got closer I noticed that it had no license plates on it. The car drove very slowly around the front and then went to the side of the building where I could no longer see it. About 5 minutes passed, and then a man came inside, who I assume was the driver of the car. He was a very tall man, about 6.5 feet tall, and pretty thin. He was wearing a black sweater and gray pants. He had a very serious look on his face. He walked in the front door and looked directly at me. The counter was on the other end of the store, so he was probably about 40 feet away. He didn't say anything and just looked at me. Eventually, I couldn't take the awkwardness, and I said hello to him and waved. He responded by turning and walking to the other side of the store. He just stood there, no longer looking at me, but looking at the wall or whatever items were for sale in that area. I was pretty confused at this time, and I was getting kind of creeped out by this guy. Eventually, he walked into the bathroom, which was at the end of the store. About 10 minutes passed, and he remained in there. Another customer finally pulled into the gas station and got some fuel and came inside to pay. I was so relieved by them finally being a normal customer. I almost wanted to bring up the man in the conversation with them because it was so strange, but I felt it wouldn't be professional, so I didn't. The customer left, and I once again felt pretty creeped out knowing this guy was still in the bathroom. A long hour went by, and we didn't get any customers. The man didn't come out of the bathroom either. I felt it had been long enough, and I decided to walk over to the bathroom. It was a bathroom with 2 stalls in it, so I could just walk in to wash my hands or something, and it wouldn't seem weird. I got to the bathroom and opened the door. I saw that the lights were out, and it was pitch black in there. I reached around for the light, but when I found it, I saw that it was already switched on. This freaked me out. I thought about just leaving, but I decided to turn on the flashlight to my phone to look around. When I did, I looked in the first stall, and it was empty. Then, I saw the second one. I could see the man's legs from the bottom of the stall. Then I shined my light up to see the man's head poking out from above the stall, staring directly at me with the creepiest smile I have ever seen. I dropped my phone as soon as I saw him. I picked it up as quick as I could and then ran for the bathroom door. I got out there, and the man did not come out and follow me. I went back to the counter and debated what I should do for a few minutes. I really did not want to go back in there, but I also didn't want the man scaring customers that went to the bathroom, and I felt that it was my responsibility to keep the place safe. As much as I didn't want to, I decided to go back and tell the man he would have to leave. I walked back to the bathroom and opened the door. I shouted to the man that he needed to leave. but there was no response. I can't say that I was surprised. I decided to just put an out of order sign on the door because of him and the light not working. Several hours went by and I only got a few customers. Amazingly, the man never left the bathroom. Finally, at 4 a.m., my coworker Devin came in and we worked together for the final hour of my shift. I felt much safer and I told him what had happened. We decided to go into the bathroom together to see what the man was still doing in there. We walked in with our flashlights shining, but when we got inside, we saw that both stalls were empty. Not a trace of the man at all. I have no idea how the man was able to leave without me seeing him. Thinking about it still freaks me out. A couple years ago, I worked room service for a hotel. This one day, I had an overnight shift, which was easy since no one usually orders food that often. An order came in at around 4 a.m., just chicken parmesan, a popular item for the limited night menu. Once the cook made it, I got the tray together and took the elevator up to the room on the 14th floor, the top floor. I walked down the corridor to the room to knock on it. Usually you knock, say room service, and once they open the door, you place the tray on the table and give them a check to sign. One reason I liked working room service was from the good tips you make. I always was tipped good, since I always brought up the food earlier than the time frame that was given to them, as well as being a nice girl that didn't try to talk too much, since most people just want their food. When I knocked on the door and waited for the person to answer, I heard movement on the other side. Not unusual, since it's them getting up from the bed or couch or muting the TV and walking over. But this noise was different. I couldn't explain how I made the mental note of why I thought it was different. It just didn't sound normal. Like it was more movement that would be appropriate for the size of a normal hotel room. I don't know what they could have been doing. When the door opened, a normal-looking man was there. I assumed a businessman, since that's the usual people that stay at my hotel. I noticed he looked very worn out or tired, and I thought it was just because it was 4 in the morning. As I set the tray down, I heard the door close, and I wasn't weirded out though, because all hotel doors automatically close if you aren't holding them open. But what was weird was when I heard the lock get set. I turned around to give the guy the check to sign, and I tried to act normal, even though I was getting nervous. He seemed too cheery for this time of night, and started asking a lot of personal questions, like what my age was, and if I grew up in the area, and what city that was. I answered how I was 19, and even though I was from the area, I just said I'm from around here, because I felt weird telling him info like that. I just started getting the creeps. I think he noticed I was getting uncomfortable and started getting closer as he was signing the check. Then he looked me up and down in the most disgusting way. I already felt violated. Right when he made eye contact with me, he lunges at me and tries to grab me. I moved to the side as fast as I could and jumped on the bed. Then I leaped off the bed for the door. I barely got the door open when he grabbed my arm and I started screaming as loud as I could to hopefully wake up anyone that was on that floor. Since he didn't want to get caught, he let me go, and right when he did, I ran down the hallway to the employee elevator and locked the door right away. My heart was pounding, not believing what just happened. With working room service, you always get some creepy people, and I always thought of bad stuff that could happen when delivering food, but I never thought it would actually happen. When I got down to the lobby, I told the night manager what happened, and he said he would call the police and report the incident. I stayed until the police showed up to give them my statement, but when they went up to the room, the man was gone. Not one trace of someone being there,
except the untouched plate of food I delivered. The name on the reservation didn't match any real person when they looked it up in the system, and the room was paid in cash, so no credit card name or info. My heart sank knowing the police couldn't do anything else besides have them be on the lookout for a tall man with dark hair and pale blue, almost gray eyes. That was the most description I could give, since he didn't have any unique features, and that this man was just out there somewhere. I then went home since I couldn't finish my shift from being so shook up. I was even more paranoid because I realized I told the man I lived in the area. He could be easily watching me leave the hotel and drive home. Since it was late, no one was on the roads, so it was easy to see I wasn't being followed as far as I knew, but my heart was still pounding the entire drive home, expecting I would see him somewhere. I got home and went inside as quick as I could and tried watching TV to distract me from spiraling in possibilities of what could have happened if I didn't get out of there in time. I had to quit my job since I was so paranoid of something similar happening again, and I don't think I can ever work at a hotel again from this incident. I work as an overnight security guard at a healthcare facility. My job is pretty easy most of the time. Usually, I just sit at a desk and watch over security cameras, as well as taking care of things around the building. There are mostly just a few overnight nurses and doctors working, and we don't typically get many people coming in the building. On one night, it was about 2 a.m, and I was sitting at my desk. Then, I noticed movements on one of the cameras. It was dark, and I couldn't really see, but it looked like a person walking past. It was coming from a room down the hall. Then, the camera went out. Nobody was supposed to be in that room at this time. I decided to go over and check it out. When I got to the room, it appeared to be empty. I did see tape covering the camera that was on the wall, though. That room connected to another room, and so I walked into there to see. That's when I saw a man that was dressed in all black. He turned and looked at me and was about 15 feet away. We stared at each other for about a second, and I was about to speak, but then he charged at me. I prepared myself to take him on. But right before he got about 5 feet away from me, he stopped, turned, and went the other direction. I told him to stop. Instead, he ran for the window and jumped out of it and ran away. I chased after, but when I got to the window, he was long gone. As it turns out, the man had broken in through the window. What his plans were once he got inside, I really don't know. All I know is that it was the weirdest and most bizarre thing I have seen while working there.
I worked at a museum a couple of years back, maybe a decade ago. I was a night shift security guard. It was as boring as you could imagine, but I desperately needed the money and it paid a few more dollars than any other job I could land, so I figured why not. I remember landing a construction job a year into working this night shift security job. I enjoyed construction a lot more and I desperately needed to get my life back on track. Being on night shift really messed with my mood and general well-being. The construction job I got had roughly the same pay, so it was a no-brainer even if I had to do a little bit more manual labor. As much as I disliked the job itself, I really liked all the people that worked at that museum. They were actually really cool. I went ahead and gave them my 2 weeks' notice and told them that I would stick around for as long as they needed me to find a replacement. They hired some skinny pale guy named Justin. When I first met him, he seemed like he was a decent enough guy. After all, it really wasn't my problem once I left. After a couple of shifts with him, though, I noticed that he was an extremely awkward and very strange person. He did this thing where he would change the tone of his voice mid-sentence.
It was really strange, and it almost made me feel like he had some kind of mental issue. Trust me, I wasn't being judgmental or anything, and if you heard it yourself, you would probably have had the same concern. Not that I thought that he was dangerous or anything, just a little out there with a possible mental illness, maybe even a speech impediment. But anyway, it was my third or fourth shift training him, and it was an ordinary night just like any other. As weird as he may have been, he seemed somewhat depressed or sad. I caught on pretty easily as he didn't make much of an effort to conceal it. We were making the usual trip throughout the entire museum, which was honestly a pretty long walk. We were probably about 10 minutes into it when I finally just asked him why he seemed so sad. He told me that he was really lonely and couldn't get a girlfriend. Again, if you had one look at this guy, you would probably understand why he couldn't get a girlfriend, let alone his weird personality. I tried telling him that there were plenty of fish in the sea and that he could probably have some luck on the internet. Online dating wasn't as big back then, though. He kind of shrugged his shoulders and just continued being sad. Whatever, I didn't know what else I could tell him. After that point, he became gradually weirder and weirder with each passing night. It was really strange. For instance, he would start going on these massive monologues about the most random things in the world. I only had to stay for a couple more shifts, but it honestly became really intolerable being around this guy. There was one night where he talked for at least 15 entire minutes about the environmental harm of pizza crust. Yes, literally pizza crust. It made absolutely no sense in the world. I tried interrupting him a couple of times to ask what was up, but he just cut me off and even started ignoring me after a certain point. When you are completely alone in a massive building with one other person, trust me when I say that their mental well-being is very important. I gradually began feeling more and more unsafe in the presence of this weird guy. Justin just seemed like he was going crazy or something. Thankfully, my entire shift with him went by decently enough. It was still awkward and moderately unbearable, but it was at least over. I started my new job and everything seemed to be going really well. I had completely forgotten about Justin and life seemed to move on. I didn't really think about that security job anymore at all. That was until I heard about an interesting story from my friend a few months later. I still kept in touch with a few people from the museum that worked there during the day. We were only Facebook friends, but that was enough for me. One of them messaged me to ask me what I thought about that guy Justin that replaced me. I was honest with her and told her that I thought Justin was really strange and possibly insane or something. And she typed back, "You're going to love this then." She then proceeded to tell me about Justin being fired for completely destroying an entire exhibit on night shift. I guess they came in at the morning shift and found him trying to put it back together. They watched the security footage and this guy literally tried to fight a dinosaur skeleton. I guess he had been acting really weird that night, judging by what she had told me about the rest of the security footage. But the interesting part of the story is that they somehow found out he was on antipsychotic medication. They figured that he probably had stopped taking his medication. That was all my friend knew, and that's all I know. It's really scary how people can stop taking their very necessary medication on a whim, and then potentially have a complete mental breakdown. I started wondering if he had been off his meds when I first met him. All I know is that I'm kinda happy I don't ever have to see Justin again. All I ever wanted to do was live in a big city. Being from a small country town, the big city and bright lights were always extremely appealing to me. I finally got my wish when I made the move to the city. I loved everything about it at first. The nightlife, the hustle, the bustle, and the people. I felt like I was tailor-made for the city, you know. I found an apartment on the 20th floor of a building and the view was incredible. I could see a sea of lights every night and the sounds were amazing. It felt like the city was a living and breathing organism. What I loved about this apartment was that I was on the top floor. I had nobody above me to distract me. However, my neighbors below me were another story. One night after work, it was late and I had picked up a job as a bartender. I made my way home for some much-needed rest. While I was getting into more comfortable clothes, I thought I could hear screaming. I turned the TV to mute and I listened intently. It was undeniably screaming. I was able to pinpoint where the screams were coming from, and it was right below me. At first, it was muffled screams. I could hear the tone and inflection of the voices, but couldn't make out any of the words. I continued getting ready and noticed that the voices were getting louder. The apartment had a small screened-in balcony, and I went out there, and I could hear much more clearly. It's like when there was a bad accident and you can't really look away. It was uncomfortable to listen to, but I wanted to keep listening, and as horrible as that may sound, it was clearly a male and female arguing. The male was going insane. I could clearly hear things like, "You don't think I'll do it," and "I'd love to see if you can fly." My first thought was, is he going to throw his chick out the window or something? Then I heard the woman get extra loud when she said, "You have no idea what I can do and whom I know." Now, versions of that argument continued for another 5 minutes or so until I heard a loud crash. So loud that it vibrated my entire screened-in balcony. It was quiet for a couple of seconds, and just as I started to fear the worst, I heard another voice now. It was a different male voice, and he screamed, "Look what you did, you idiot!" The woman started to scream back at him. I didn't hear the other man, so I started to let my mind wander again as to what happened. The briefest of relief came over me when I heard the first guy start shouting again. At this point, all three people were just shouting almost incoherently to each other. I contemplated for a while what I should do. Clearly, I should have just called the cops, but I didn't, and instead, I made a choice that I would soon come to regret. As you would see in movies or shows, I grabbed a broomstick, and I just banged on the floor in my living room. That was my attempt to alert the neighbors that they were loud and to just keep it down. Now, after my assault on the floorboards, I listened, and I didn't hear anything. I went back out to the balcony to see if I could hear anything, and it was still quiet. I figured for a moment that I'd accomplished my goal, but I could not have been more wrong. They must have gone out to their balcony because now they started to scream at me. I had heard one of the men first as he addressed his anger at me saying, "Are you serious? Do you have a problem?" I just stayed quiet. Then I heard the woman, her responding, "Mind your business, this doesn't concern you." Now, embarrassed, I quietly went inside and just wanted this ordeal to be over. I could hear the muffled screaming, but now I couldn't tell if they were yelling at me or yelling amongst themselves. I can't even begin to explain how uncomfortable it is to sit and just hear this level of screaming. The type of screaming that I would consider borderline violence, really. And then finally, it stopped. It was finally quiet enough for nearly 20 minutes, and I turned off the TV and just got into bed. And just as I was dozing off, I heard a knock at the door. I thought maybe I was going in and out of consciousness, and maybe I dreamed the knock at the door. But I slowly got out of bed and made my way to the door. I heard the knock again, and it was clearly a knock and not my imagination. I asked who it was, and the only response I got was another slow series of knocks. The apartments I lived in all had small cameras on the side of the door, so I was able to pull up the camera. It was 2 guys and a girl, and right away I realized that it had to be my neighbors from below me. I didn't answer the door, and then the knocks kept coming. The woman was doing the knocking, and the 2 men just stood behind her with their hands in their pockets, it seemed. I'm not sure what they planned on doing at 3:30 in the morning. I just continued to ignore them at the door, and that's when the one guy started beating on the door with his fist. I was able to get a good look at the guy. He was huge. He was bald and had a tight beard. He had some sort of line work tattoo coming from the back of his shirt to the bottom of his skull. He had a fist that looked like a boulder as he banged on the door, and they knew about the camera since they lived in the building, and that's when the man leaned over to the camera box and started to whisper, "Open the door! Open the door! Open the door!" And he just kept saying that on repeat. I didn't respond, and in fact, I finally, thank God, did call the police. I went to the bedroom and shut the door and whispered to the dispatch operator. I remained on the phone with them until they sent someone. The entire time I waited, they just kept knocking and whispering, "Open the door." They were still standing there when the police finally showed up. One of the officers escorted them away, and I'm not sure what happened to them after that. I spoke with one of the police officers after the other one got them off my floor. I don't think they were below me because I couldn't hear anything, and I gave the officer my entire account of the evening, and that was basically it. I never heard back from the police, but I also never had a run-in with these three again. I also took extra precautions after this and locked my door with an extra lock. And I never heard another peep from that apartment below me after this, which I found most strange of all about all of this. Even though I had just moved to the city not that long before, I had my fill of the city after this night, and once my lease was up, I moved back to the country, where it was quiet all the time. My girlfriend and I had just moved into our new apartment not that long ago. We love the place, and it's our first place together, so for that reason, it's very special to us. I have lived in apartments before, and they can be less than ideal. This place, on the other hand, was great. The apartment unit was recently remodeled, and everything was brand new. It was a great little place to start this chapter of our lives. Now, I know this may sound ridiculous, but for me, one of the best parts was behind the apartments. There was a small path that led to a local breakfast diner. Anybody who knows me knows I can crush some bacon and eggs every day of the week. I told my girlfriend about the short path and told her that on Sunday, when she was off and free from work, that we would have to have a little walk over to the diner. Sunday came and we made our way to the path. Now, it's important to note that the path itself is maybe 30 yards or so. It's not very long. It is literally a short dirt path surrounded by a massive path of trees. When we were walking over to the diner, we noticed a bag of clothes just sitting in the middle of the dirt path. We both just looked at it and kept walking. I mean, sure, it was weird, but it was breakfast time, and I wasn't worried about a bag of clothes. I figured someone just dropped it while walking to the diner or something. And after our amazing breakfast, we walked back and noticed that the bag was gone. I said to my girlfriend, "See, I told you someone just dropped it." And she begrudgingly agreed, but we went about our day. I worked from home during the week, so I would walk over to the diner every morning. The next day, when I walked to the diner, I noticed the bag again, but this time, it was to the side of the path instead of just in the middle of the walkway. I just figured that I missed it yesterday and somebody must have just moved it, and that's why we didn't see it when we walked back to the apartment. After breakfast, when I walked back, I saw someone going through the bag. I cautiously walked by just because it looked like some strange man. When I got closer, the man turned around and looked at me with this sort of crazed look in his eyes, but I kept walking and just gave him a friendly good morning. The man said nothing, but out of the thick trees, a very small and frail-looking woman appeared. Her legs looked more like twigs, and she was missing most of her teeth. I instinctively jumped back just because it was very alarming. In a low, raspy voice, almost like she smoked 8 cigarettes a day for breakfast alone, she says, "Keep walking." I didn't engage with those two at all. I did keep walking, and just shook my head. I didn't want to tell my girlfriend about that because I figured that she would never want to walk over to that diner again, and I was pretty sure that this was just some random one-time event with just some shady characters. I didn't go to breakfast until Friday. I made my way to the path and I was instantly relieved that the bag was gone. While I was walking down the short path, I investigated the tree line where the bag was located the last time I walked, and I saw the silhouettes of 2 people standing in the foliage. I didn't stop and look and ultimately just kept going. My gut told me who was standing there, but I didn't want to take any chances. I felt uneasy during my meal, and I didn't want to walk by that path again. I had visions in my head of those 2 people jumping out and trying to rob me or something. So, after breakfast, instead of walking through the pathway, I walked the long way, all the way around, which ended up being about 40 minutes compared to the quick 5 minutes, believe it or not. I forgot to tell my girlfriend about the experience that I had that day. When Sunday came, she suggested that we go to the diner. Now I was pumped for breakfast, and sadly, I had already completely forgotten about the brief experience that I had on that path. As I write this, and I'm listing the events that happened, I'm ashamed that I didn't remember, but at that moment, since nothing really had happened, I just didn't think about it. It wasn't until we got to the path that Sunday morning that I remembered what had happened. I stopped for a quick second, but then kept going. I didn't want to scare my girlfriend, and there was a chance the 2 were gone. While we were walking, she was telling me some story, and I was watching the tree line for any movement. About halfway through the path, the man ran out of the woods and stood blocking our path. The woman came out and stood behind us. My girlfriend, trying to be rational, tried to communicate with the 2, but Neither of them said anything and just started inching closer to us. The gap was closing, and I could feel the panic start setting in. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand, and as I attempted to make my move, instead of running through the guy, who was significantly larger than the woman, I turned and ran through the skinny woman like I was a truck. As I was running through the woman, she somehow got a hold of my back and scratched me with her nails, which surprisingly broke my skin. She screamed one of the most horrific noises I had ever heard when we ran by. As we ran back to our apartment, I could hear them fighting on the path, but I couldn't make out the words. We just called the police when we got back and reported the incident, but of course, they were already gone when they went to check. The apartment has cameras all over the lot, but none of them reached the path, so they had no footage of the two. About 20 feet into the thickness, they found sleeping bags, trash, and bottles. These two had been living on the path for a while before they finally decided to attack us. Thankfully, we didn't sustain any real injuries, and as far as we know, nobody else got hurt or attacked. We feel a little uneasy that these two were never caught, and unfortunately, no new information was ever reported. I make the short drive now whenever I go to the diner, and I plan on never taking that short path ever again.
I'm not even sure where to begin with this. Whether it was two separate incidents or related, I can't be sure. Anyway, to start off, I'm a small-town southern girl. I mean, a town small enough where you never have to lock your doors. Be that as it may, I've always had problems believing that people are real monsters, but life has a way of kicking you with the truth. My husband and I left the small town to move back to the place that he's from, a city almost 2,000 miles away. Family, health, job opportunities, things like that. We moved into an apartment that was considered to be in a bad part of town, and I was quick to always lock my doors, everything, especially with our son who was 6 or 7 when this incident took place back in 2020. I should note that there's 2 incidents in this story. The first happened when my husband first started working as a correctional officer for the state. I won't say which one, as it's really not that important. Anyway, when he was hired, he was working evenings/nights, leaving me home with our son. When the pandemic hit, he was considered one of the essential employees, and therefore would work his regular shifts. One night, I thought I was going to be like any other. Make dinner, bathe our son, get him to bed, then just spend time watching TV until I either fell asleep or my husband came home. This night, I should have just known something was wrong. I had this innate sense of dread, and I couldn't figure out why. Sure, I heard the emergency sirens and fighting of our neighbors, but we lived in that apartment for a little over a year, and it was common to hear all that. I should also point out that the buildings in the complex were locked, so you need a key to get into the building, but some asshole would always rig our building door to stay open, even with the lack of security. I was in the kitchen cooking dinner as my son had played on the floor with his toys, and I kept the TV noise low as to not disturb anyone. Because I kept it quiet, I could hear everything going on inside the apartment. So when I heard the distinct sound of someone messing with my door, clearly trying to break in, I knew it was far too early for my husband to be off, and immediately grabbed a butcher knife. I told my son to hide under the dining table, and I gave him a small steak knife, and he must have heard the panic in my voice, because without a word, he silently did as I said. As I made sure that he was safely hidden, I could still hear whoever it was trying to pick open the deadbolt. Once I was sure my son was safe, I clutched the butcher knife and tiptoed to the door, shaking like crazy. They got the deadbolt unlocked a few minutes later. I say they because when they opened my door, there were 2 men, about 5'9", 5'10", both of them with guns in the waistbands of their pants. I didn't even think at this point, instead going on full motherly protection. Before either one of them could set foot across the threshold, I shot my hand out, knife pointed directly between the eyes of one of them, and then screamed, "I swear to God, If you don't get the f out of my damn apartment, I'm gonna make damn sure that you wish you were never born. Either they forgot they were carrying, or the guns were fake. Or maybe I just surprised and scared them. I don't know. I just know the color drained from their faces, and they ran away and out of the building calling me a crazy white bitch. About 2 weeks to a month later, we adopted a Siberian Husky mix named Coda. Coda is not the typical Husky. Instead, he likes to lounge around and is generally pretty quiet. With my husband working all the time and me being a stay-at-home mom, it was really no big deal to be sure the dog had his daily walks. One night, a couple of days after we adopted Coda, I took him out to do his business. Now, as a general thing with me, I always have headphones in, as I don't want to bother people or I'm writing and need to focus. This night was no other, and instead of a full walk around the area, I kept him in the yard around my apartment building. It was extremely dark out, even with the streetlights, and I wanted to stay close to my unit. The building has a fence around it with some yard space, just like a painted country fence. Anyway, I had my headphones in listening to music with my back to the fence. I faintly noticed headlights from what I thought was a passing vehicle. I didn't see the car stop at the fence corner, nor the men getting out and coming up behind me. As a side note, I should point out that I'm no taller than 5'0", and I weigh about 130 pounds, and my husky weighed almost as much as I do. I was really wondering why he wasn't doing his business, thinking maybe he was just getting a sense of the area. That was when his head turned and then lowered. I thought my own dog was looking at me and snarling at me, but I then turned and saw these guys jump the fence with knives in their hands. At the time, it was cold outside, and there was still a mask mandate in effect, so I never saw their faces. I thought for sure I would die, or maybe even get kidnapped or worse. But my dog began to growl, and without warning, leaps right past me and then jumps on one of the men, sinking his teeth in the guy's shoulder. The movement was so sudden that I kinda just stood there speechless, and the other guy that my dog hadn't jumped on then ran back to his white SUV, no license plate. The one my dog had jumped on had managed to struggle free, tearing his hoodie in the process before he too had taken off back to the SUV. The two guys gunning it out of there so fast that the tires screamed on the pavement before they disappeared down a dark street. I was in shock after that, absent-mindedly petting Coda and calling him a good boy. The dog does his business as if nothing had happened. We go back upstairs to the apartment, and still in shock, I don't even realize how hard I shut the door, waking up my husband after he'd gone to bed. He was understandably angry at first. It was only when he saw my face, how numb I was, that he guided me to sit down and tell him what happened. It took me a while, at least an hour before I reacted or even spoke. I was almost catatonic. I never had someone attempt to do that to me before. Sure, I've had my fair share of horror story-esque experiences, but never an attempted kidnapping. When I finally told him, my voice was so quiet he could barely hear me, and I ended up having to repeat myself. It was only then that the gravity of the situation finally kicked me in the face. I started shaking, crying, and panicking so hard I couldn't breathe and retched in the bathroom. I held it together just long enough to get it out. Once that had passed, my husband insisted I called the cops. It took about 20 minutes of coaxing, but I did. They showed up and I spent 2 hours with a couple of officers trying to explain the whole situation. One of the officers had to sit me down and guide me through another panic attack. After I told them everything, they suggested I change my routine and that they would be doing some follow-ups with the leasing office to get security footage to catch the guys responsible. The cops showed up to the leasing office about an hour after they opened, but they had kept the doors locked during business hours and wouldn't answer the door. The officers told me this, and then explained they drove around the complex to look for security cameras, but they found none. So they found out and then told me that the security the leasing office possessed was only one camera, which was pointed in the main office, and that was it. They also had no security footage, and they boast to have excellent security. Like I said before, I don't know if the two incidents of what happened to me are related or not. I personally don't think they are, but it was still very frightening to be in a location that I'm supposed to consider my home, and then have my own home broken into and I'm almost abducted right out of my yard. We ended up moving out a month later into a small town neighborhood several miles away where it's a hell of a lot safer. But that's my story. If anyone's ever feeling unsafe for reasons they can't explain, or just a general sense of anxiety that something bad's going to happen, don't ignore it, and please stay alert. I'm so glad that I don't live in apartments anymore, at least in the city I used to live in. I had a family across the hall from me, and they were okay people, except for their oldest son. He didn't say much, but when he did, he talked in a creepy kind of soft-spoken way like Michael Jackson, but more like he was on something. He had offered to help us move my wife's stuff into our apartment when her family showed up with a U-Haul, and her family, being trusted people, said yes. Now, I was a bit hesitant, but we did need the extra help. We somehow got to talking about a pair of pants that I no longer needed, and he's immediately like, "Yo, can I have them?" "Sure, whatever, dude." He stares at the pants like he found a lost treasure. It was weird. As we're moving stuff, he then asks if there's anything else he can have. Creepy. I told him we'd let him know if something fit him that we don't want. After that, my wife knew firsthand just how weird he was. One time he randomly knocked on our door and asked if we wanted to buy some candy. Fast forward a few months later, and some unrelated stuff in our apartment was making us uneasy, and we were seriously considering not renewing our lease. I knew it was time to leave when we were woken up at 6 a.m. one morning to hear the police shouting, "It's the police, open up! We have a search warrant!" They shout 2 more times, and then we hear a loud crack, and we saw through the people that they busted down a door. A week later, the family moved out. I hated that they left because other members of the family seemed pretty normal. Unfortunately, a week or 2 later, we see the older creepy-ass son hanging around our hallway. I had nodded to him on my way out to get the mail, and I then called my wife like, "He's still here? What the hell?" She says I should strike up a conversation to find out if his family's still here, and then act confused even though we saw them taking out furniture. So when I came back to the apartment, I had made eye contact, and I asked how his family's doing. "They're good," he responds. Cool, good to hear. I haven't seen y'all around lately. I thought I saw them moving stuff out. Wait, did y'all move?" "Yeah, they moved." I ended the conversation soon after, and then went back into my own apartment. If they moved, why the hell is he hanging around our hallway? The only thing I can think of is that maybe the older son was into drugs, which would explain his weird behavior. Then the police caught him buying or selling drugs and busted down his family's place because it's his address. Maybe they didn't take him with them because they didn't want part of any of his lifestyle. It's really the only thing I can make out of it, and we only saw him a couple more times before we moved. We barely landed an opening in an apartment on the other side of the town, which is much safer. Our budget was real tight, but it was well worth it, and I'm so glad that I don't live in that area anymore. Peace, love, and be safe and vigilant out there, everyone. Please.
When I was in college, I lived in apartments that weren't on campus but still called student housing. I saw this guy around that I thought was pretty cute. His name was Kiefer. He knocked on my door one day and he said he was the maintenance man and that he needed to change our AC filters. I was making dinner for my roommate at the time and for myself, and he commented that it smelled really good, so I invited him in to stay for dinner. All went pretty normal as we watched a movie afterwards. Totally innocent. At about midnight or so, I kept telling him that I was really tired, trying to hint for him to leave. My roommate had already gone to bed, so it was just him and me now. After telling him to leave because I was going to bed, he kept trying to talk me out of it, saying that I should stay up longer. He just kept taking forever, trying to drag it out. When he was putting on his shoes, he then started crying that he had a cramp in both of his calves. He told me that he couldn't walk upstairs and that he didn't know what to do. I really wanted to go knock on his door to have his roommate come and get him, but I'm in a wheelchair and I couldn't go upstairs. We had an extra bedroom in our apartment that only had a bed in it and nothing else. He continued asking if he could sleep in the room and I kept telling him no. We argued for like 10 minutes about allowing him to sleep in the extra bedroom. I was so freaking exhausted, I just went ahead and decided to let him. I locked my roommate's door and my door so that he at least couldn't come into our rooms. When I woke up the next morning, luckily he was gone and nothing was stolen. I honestly should have reported it to the apartment complex, but I wasn't really thinking. A couple of days later, I heard someone knock on my bedroom window in the middle of the night, and I totally flipped out about it. It ended up being Kiefer, but obviously I didn't let him in. Then the next night, my roommate and I were in the living room, and then he came and knocked on our door. Ashley, my roommate, answered it, and he asked for me, and she said that I was asleep already. His response?
No, I know she's not asleep. I looked inside y'all's window, so I know she's awake.
Yeah, Kiefer was definitely a creep. So, about 4 years ago, my parents were going out. And with that, I was going to be home all alone for at least 3 to 4 hours. They left around 6 and they said they would be home around 9 to 12. Whenever they left, I went downstairs. I got some snacks and I had put on Netflix to then look around for a new show. After like 2 hours of watching a new show, that's when I then heard a very strange noise coming from the front porch. Keep in mind, I have a wraparound porch and there were a lot of windows looking out. Me being curious, I pulled back the curtains and then looked out into the dark yard. After looking around, nothing seemed off until I saw a black silhouette of a man standing by the front door. I froze in fear, dropping the curtains, and then ran upstairs into my parents' room. After 5 minutes of waiting, I decided to text my parents. I told them the incident, and surprise, surprise, they didn't believe me, given that I was only 13. I sat there and I thought maybe it was my imagination. I decided to walk back downstairs and finish my show. I realized the motion sensor light in the backyard was now on. You can either turn the light on, or if anyone walks by it, it will turn on automatically. Keep in mind that this light isn't very sensitive. Most time it turns on whenever a person or animal walks by it. Once I realized what was going on, I ran back to my parents' room, once again in tears. I picked up the house phone to call the police, when I then heard a whisper from outside my window.
Hey, I know you're in there. Just come out. Come out here real quick. I just want to talk to you.
My heart dropped and was about to beat right out of my chest. I froze in fear, then snapped back and called the police. The 911 operator told me to hide in a closet and to stay quiet. She told me to stay on the line just in case anything else happens. Also, keep in mind that my house is around 15 minutes away from the nearest town. After sitting in my parents' closet, I heard the back door creak. Tears started rolling, as I then heard someone walking around in the kitchen and living room. I told the 911 operator what was happening, and then I heard something fall over downstairs. Then I heard the stairs creaking, and a man walking around the bedrooms. Thank God I locked the bedroom door, because he saw it was locked, and just kept going. Or so I thought. Well, after around 30 seconds, I heard the loudest bang of my life, and with a man screaming. And like a miracle, right after this, I then heard police sirens, and the man running away, and then the back door slamming shut.
I ran out and I saw him running into the woods. I ran outside and I told the cops everything. And then they took me to my aunt's house, where I waited at for my parents to come home. Ever since this happened, they never did find the man, considering we never really got any details on him. I pray and hope he never returns.
I live in a quiet, nice, suburban neighborhood with mostly old people or families with kids. When I was younger, around the age of 8 to 12, me and my two brothers, we'll call them J and K. One's a twin and the other's 2 years younger than me. As well as my neighbor, we'll call him C. We used to play a game on my block outside at night that we liked to call Murder Run. Sometimes other kids would join in if my brother or I had friends over, so most of the time it was 6 or more people. The rules of the game were that one person, or sometimes two, would go hide somewhere on our street within the boundaries that we set. Usually, the boundaries were about 60 feet to the right of my house and to the end of the block to the left. There were no rules on where you could hide, so sometimes someone would be behind a tree or other times behind a car. The hiders would be called the murderers. Our house was in the middle of the two boundaries, so you could go 2 ways. The rest of the group, who we would call runners or the victims. While the murderers were running to hide, the rest of us would sit on the front steps of my house, close our eyes, and we would count to 1 minute. After the minute had passed, we would open our eyes and decide which way we wanted to go. Usually, the group would split up. One section goes right, and the other goes left. The groups would pretty much just walk in the direction towards the boundaries, looking for shadows or under cars to see if we could see the murderer. Eventually, when the murderer would see us, hopefully when we couldn't see them, they would jump out from wherever they were hiding and chase us back to the house. If the murderers caught you before you touched the front steps, you had to play the murderer in the next round. The murderer carried a small wooden sword that they would tag you with. It didn't mean anything in the game, but it added to the fun. This comes into play later. One time, it was me, my 2 brothers, his one friend who we will call H, and our neighbor playing, so overall it was 5 of us. I think it was about 8:30 or 9 p.m., and it was September, so it was starting to get cold and dark earlier in the day. We had already been playing a few rounds, and we were starting to get tired, so we decided to play one more round and then call it a day. This time, it was C who had to be the murderer, since he hadn't had a chance yet. So we gave him the wooden knife, and we turned around and started counting. Once we finished counting, we decided who would go what way. My brother J was the fastest and wanted to be cool, so he said he would go alone, but his friend H wanted to go with him. They were both fairly fast, so I knew that they would win the round if C was on that side. So off we went. Me and K went right, and J and H went left. I can't even describe how much adrenaline you felt, even when you knew you couldn't get hurt. That's why I love this game so much. As we were walking, I saw a small shadow from behind a thick tree, with C's hair obviously showing beneath the streetlight. Just as I was about to say that I saw him, I heard H and J scream from the other end of the boundary. Someone was chasing them too. They were both running and laughing, but I was not laughing. There were 2 possibilities here. Either the person behind the tree not even 5 feet in front of me wasn't C, or the person currently chasing my brother and his friend wasn't C. But I heard something behind me and turned around, and C was standing there asking why they were running. But when he saw someone chasing them, his face went white. He was 2 years older than us, and I had never seen him scared, but he looked like he was going to be sick. I whipped my head around, and K started screaming at J and H to run. As soon as J and H saw C standing behind us, they turned around and realized that the person they were being chased by was not C. They stopped laughing and started running faster than I had ever seen them run in their lives. Instinctively, C, K, and I also started running back to the house. We were much farther away from the house than J and H. An important thing to note about the game is that even if the murderer is on one side, if the people who came that way make it back first, the murderer can still try to tag the others, even if you went the other way to find them. J and H were screaming now, but they weren't looking back. I could see that they were most likely going to get there after them, which worried me because I didn't want to lose the game. Yes, that was what I was worried about, until I saw what the man was holding. C was still holding the wooden knife, but whoever was chasing J and H was holding something shinier. I soon realized that he was holding an actual knife. At this point, my adrenaline was pulsing through me, and I couldn't think of anything besides what would happen if I got there after them. I screamed at K and C to leave me and run as fast as they could to the house, and they definitely did not protest. I was always the slowest, which meant I pretty much always lost. Luckily, it didn't seem like this other guy was very fast either. As I was running, I saw him a little better. He was wearing a black sweatshirt and black sweatpants, but his shoes were white, like bright white, not dirty at all. They looked like they were fresh out of the box, which didn't make much sense because the rest of his outfit was pretty scuffed up. When I got closer, I realized that his whole outfit was a little too small for him, like he was wearing all kids' sizes. It hit me that he must have been trying to look like a kid. Even his sneakers were too small for him, which may have explained the weird way he was running, like he had rocks in his shoes or something. I was still running, almost to the stairs. I spit out the blood in my mouth because of how hard I was biting inside of my cheeks. Finally, I saw J and H reach the stairs, with whoever this guy was maybe 10 to 15 feet behind them, just enough for me to beat him. C and K got to the stairs seconds after J and H, and I reached them just after. What happened next was one of the scariest things in my life. As soon as I reached the stairs, as the last one, whoever this guy was, just stopped, was standing on the sidewalk in front of our house like a horror movie with his head tilted to the side. I couldn't see his face. He was backlit by the streetlight, so all we could see was the silhouette of his tight-fit clothes. A bit of his mouth was surrounded by enough stubble to tell him he was in his mid to late 30s, and the sharp object in his hand. My brother was fumbling at the door to get it open, and the rest of us were just crying, me the most as I was holding my little brother. But then he just walked away. Like he literally just walked down the street and around the corner. But right as he got to the little drops of blood I had spit out, he stopped and turned his head back and smiled at me, then continued walking. I took that moment to bust the door down and drag everyone inside, lock it behind me, and tell my parents what happened. We didn't call the police because my dad went outside and couldn't see anyone, and after we told him that he went around the corner, my dad just assumed that he went into the woods. We made sure to lock all the doors that night. Now, the story mostly ends there since we never saw the man again. But the other night, as I was walking home from the bus, I remembered that story, and I was still confused why the man left, until a chill ran up my spine when I realized he was playing the game. The scariest part, though, is that night, we didn't explain the rules to anyone because everyone that was playing that night already knew the rules, which means that whoever was chasing us had been there prior to that night and had been there when we explained the rules at a different time. I still wonder why he didn't chase us before the last round, and I still wonder what would have happened if the two fastest runners didn't go that way and if it was me instead. It's still creepy that he knows where we live, and I still get uncomfortable when I walk past that tree that I saw him come out of. I still wonder where he went and how long he had been watching us for. I'm much older now, and my younger brother is too young to remember. I don't talk to C or H much anymore, and I'm pretty sure J blocked it out of his memory. I don't want to bring it up to any of them, but part of me is curious how they remember that night, or if they remember it at all. Before I tell this story, I will give you some background. I live in a neighborhood that's slightly out in the country. It's not in the middle of nowhere, but probably about 40 minutes from the closest major city. The area has some farms and lots of woods and things like that. Because it's quieter around here and everybody has a little bit more land, there's more wildlife. I like to go on walks around my neighborhood because there's a lot of interesting things to see. I usually start at my house and walk along the side of the street because there are no sidewalks around here. I will go for about a half a mile to a mile and then turn around and head back. There are a few quiet streets that lead to other neighborhoods. I rarely see anybody driving or walking when I go on the walks. Occasionally, somebody walking a dog or something like that, but usually nothing. There's also a park nearby that's usually pretty quiet, but sometimes I go there and then head back. Now, to start this story, it was the evening and almost sunset. I was working a little bit later hours that week than usual. With it being the early spring, the sun also set kind of early as well. I walked from my house to the park that was a little less than a mile away. When I was on my way back, I heard a noise in somebody's yard. It was the space between one house and another, and there was a large amount of room between them. There were a few trees and bushes in that space. It was dark, but it sounded like maybe a larger animal was behind one of the trees. I stopped and looked. At first, I didn't see anything, but then what I did see shocked me. There was a man looking at me from behind one of the trees. It was really dark, but it appeared as though he was looking back at me. When he saw me, he then ducked behind a tree. This was kind of odd. I didn't think that the man lived there, and I didn't recognize him. Sure, I didn't know all of my neighbors, but this behavior was just strange, and it didn't seem like he lived there. But there wasn't much about it that I could do, so I kept walking home. Eventually, I made it back and everything was fine. But the very next night, I took another walk at around the same time. Once again, I saw this man. But this time, he was in a completely different neighbor's yard, kind of lurking around again. He kind of ducked behind a bush when I started to walk by. This made me a lot more nervous than I had been the previous night. I didn't even really bother to look over and just kept on walking home. The man stayed there as I moved past, and that night I was able to make it home safely as well. Each night after making it home, I would forget about the man. The very next night, I once again went on a walk after work. I went to the park, and this time, when I got to the park, the man was there. There was nobody else at the park, which was typical. It was usually really quiet. The guy was lurking around on the edge of the woods that surrounded part of the park. Overall, it was very suspicious. I decided to head back home almost as soon as I saw him. I was also kicking myself for even going out on a walk that night, forgetting about the suspicious guy lurking around the neighborhood. When I left the park, it only took about a minute before I heard the footsteps behind me. They were a ways back, but it was a quiet night, so it was very easy to hear. He was probably at least 50 feet behind me. I sort of looked back and noticed him way off in the distance. I tried to ignore it and kept going back home, but I was worried. What if the man followed me all the way back to my house? I also had no clue what he was even doing. Minutes went by and things remained the same. I suppose I could have called the police, but the man would have noticed. I also had no proof of him doing anything wrong. I also sort of half expected the guy to jump into somebody's yard at any time and lurk around like he had been. By the time I finally made it to my street, the guy was still behind me at about the same distance. I walked a little bit faster and was holding back everything within myself to not start sprinting right there. At long last, I reached my driveway. Now, I should mention that I have a really long driveway, so I wasn't in the clear just yet. The guy was still probably 50 feet behind me. I walked quickly up my driveway and felt relief for a minute, expecting the man to pass by and keep going down the road. But when I was almost at my front step, I thought I heard him starting to enter my driveway area. I got out my keys to unlock the door as quickly as possible. My hands were shaking in the process, making it harder. I could hear his footsteps gradually getting closer to me as I did. It seemed as though they were speeding up as well. Finally, my door was unlocked and I swung it open. Once I was inside, I slammed it shut and turned the lock. Then I exhaled in relief. No more than 5 seconds later, I heard the doorknob turn. It wouldn't open though. The man was right outside, and I was so scared that I ran to the opposite end of my house. A few minutes went by and I listened closely. I returned to the front of the house after not hearing anything for several minutes. When I did, I looked outside, and the man was now gone. I looked out several other windows, but did not see him. After that night, I took a break from going on walks for a while. I'm not sure who the guy was, but I didn't see him again. This is a true story. It happened to my family, and it involved my firstborn son, who was just a couple of months away from his 8th birthday. He was in 2nd grade at the time. We were living in Tacoma, Washington back then, and I must admit that it's forever changed my life, especially in my role as a mother. It's been 27 years since this occurred, but it still haunts me to this day. A little backstory to put these events into perspective. January of 1995 was a traumatic month for our family. My son, up to this point, had been walking to and from his bus stop. The bus stop was a block and a half away from our house. The walk was a small, hilly walk, down to it in the morning and up in the afternoons. During that month of January, an elderly man from the Korean grocery store across the street was brutally murdered. I could see the shop from our bathroom window, and we also survived our first earthquake, so you can see that this was a traumatic month from the start. My son was used to traversing the alleyway that ran between the back of the houses on our street and the back of the houses on the next street. We were so used to this that it had become commonplace, and there was not a worry in the world as to our son's safety until that fateful day in January of 1995. As usual, our day had started in the typical fashion. I arose at 6 a.m. in the morning to begin preparing our children for school. Our second oldest was the first to leave because he was in special ed and had to be bused across the city to the west side of Tacoma. Then our oldest son left the house, as usual. We kissed goodbye, and I watched as he walked through the small housing complex we lived in and out the gate and started down the alleyway. Now, my next oldest son, who was only 4 at the time, was ready to go off to preschool, while my youngest son, at the tender age of 3, was still at home with mommy. After I got son number 3 off to school, then it was a typical day for myself, my husband, and our youngest. We lived in a small complex with 4 small houses, each one with a fenced yard and then another gate that enclosed the small complex. At the time of this incident, my husband and I were managing the property for our landlord, and so we had recently rented out the house next door to us. The tenant was a sweet old black lady with a head full of gray hair and just as nice as can be. She would be a delight to live next to and key to what happened this particular afternoon. Now, I'm not going to go into detail of my daily routine, as that's all irrelevant. What happens next will start in the afternoon, at the usual time that I knew my oldest son would be coming home from school. I was busy in the house, tending to the household chores, when I heard a frantic knocking at my front door. I opened it and saw through the screen door that it was my next-door neighbor. I don't remember her name now, although I'll never forget her heroic actions that day. I asked her what was wrong, because she had a panicked look on her face, and she was yelling at me, saying that someone was trying to kidnap my son. She had stepped outside and seen what was happening, and then ran to us. I screamed for my husband, and we ran out the front door, and to my horror, a man in a white sedan was trying to grab our son and pull him into the vehicle. I was screaming and going ballistic, while my husband started running towards the car screaming, "Get your hands off my son, I'm going to kill you." And I was screaming, "Kill him, hon." We were both staring in horror, while our son tried to get away. And then the man kept moving the car up a bit and opening his door to try to block our son. Our son's back was now against the fence that surrounded the complex we lived in. At one point, he actually had his hand on our son's arm and was about to pull him into the car when the neighbors heard the commotion and jumped into action. At this point, our neighbors who lived across the alley and were drinking buddies of my husband heard the commotion, and both of them, 2 brothers, leapt over the 6-foot fence, sprinted around to the front of the perp's car, and then one brother, out of respect for their privacy, I'm not giving their names, swept up our son into his arms and hurriedly brought him back to me and said, "Here, Mom." In the meantime, the man just sat there, stone silent in his car, not moving at all. I stared into his eyes, and I can tell you one thing. I had never seen such dark, soulless eyes as I did when I stared into that man's black eyes. I shivered because it was like I was looking into the very eyes of utter darkness, the devil himself. He actually sat there long enough that we were all able to get a complete physical description of the man, the vehicle, and the license plate. My neighbor called the police. Of course, before they arrived, the man finally sped off, throwing gravel and dirt up in the wake of his departure. I still shudder to this day when I think of what would have happened if my neighbors across the alley hadn't come to our defense. That perp would likely have gotten our son into the car, and we would have never seen him again. One other thing that upset me is right before the man left, he pulled out a Polaroid camera and rapidly took a couple of shots of our son. That really creeped me out so much. The police arrived soon thereafter, or should I say one police officer, who looked like he couldn't have been more than 25 or 26 years old. Definitely late 20s, and at the time, I was only in my early 30s, so not much younger than myself. He definitely looked as though he had just come out of the police academy. My advice to all police, don't send a rookie out to investigate child abduction cases or near abduction cases. That young officer eyed me skeptically and just said that I was a hysterical mom. I couldn't believe it. Of course I'm going to be hysterical. Someone just tried to abduct our son. I'm sorry, but that should have been handled by a seasoned detective. This scarred me for life, and for a long time, almost 3 years, I wouldn't let our son out of my sight and made him hold my hand everywhere we went. And obviously, I went to extremes to protect my other children as well. Of course, he grew up and became irritated with my overprotectiveness, as I wouldn't let him out of my sight. He was almost 10 and a half years old before he finally got out of the house and away from me, and that was because of his dad. He'd finally been allowed to leave the house and ride his bike down to the corner store. At this time, we were no longer living in the house where the near abduction attempt occurred. As I conclude this, our son is now 35 years old, happily married, and is a successful auto mechanic with his own shop and business. We no longer live in Washington State, but have moved to another state. God bless all of you and take care. It's a dangerous world out there.
So for context, I'm a 20-year-old female, and at the time of these events, I was around 12 to 13. So I grew up in a very rural area. Like, my town was so small that it was legally considered a village. My house is one of 4 on a span of about 40 acres. There was my childhood home, my grandparents' house that was right up the street, and 2 neighbors. One of the neighbors, we'll call T, had been living across near my family for as long as I could remember, and he rented out a trailer he owned which was inhabited by the 4th neighbor, who we'll call J. J and his girlfriend, who we'll call A, had moved in just a few months before these events, and I hadn't really met them. I knew of them, but I hadn't interacted with them directly. The day that I met J and A was extremely awkward, as I was a kid and I didn't really want to talk to them. But my grandma had made me go with her to drop off some vegetables that she had grown in her garden. When they came out right after my grandma knocked on their trailer door, I was first struck by how they looked. I know that it sounds bad, but I'm not judging. But I know that both of them were addicted to meth. My grandma started the conversation, and I tried to be polite as I was raised to be, by then introducing myself when told to do so. I wasn't really able to finish my sentence, as I noticed Jay was staring at me very intently. He looked like he was either mad or hungry, or even both. Not the creepiest off the bat, as they both seemed polite enough, and I brushed off the stares, just him trying to be polite, looking at me as I spoke to him as most people do. The creepy part is that as time went on, he began to try and be near me more and more. He'd ride his bike past our house over and over for what seemed like hours, all while me and my brother played catch in the yard. Then he began to go to church with me, my brother, and my grandparents. He made sure to sit next to me in the back seat of the car as he rode with us. If my brother tried to sit in the middle so I wasn't right next to Jay, he'd throw a fit about how my brother was squishing him against the door. Then he began coming to my grandma's house whenever she'd have me and my brother after school, offering to tutor me with various subjects. What really scared me was that I began to see him walking near our house at night, trying to shine a flashlight into my window. He tried various things to get close to me. He tried to convince my parents to let him teach me how to golf, tried to help me practice my catching positions for softball, and he tried to get me to go with him and A to the movies. And also, none of these things ever included my brother, only me. Things finally came to a head when I was playing with my dog outside in our front yard, and he had started repeatedly doing laps on his bike down the road again, staring at me just like he did the day we met. I was extremely uncomfortable, as you can all imagine. I've always had very good intuition about people, and something was just really off with him. But that day, I was terrified. He parked his bike right in the middle of the road and got off. He started walking towards me at almost a jog, and I just kept backing away from him. What happened next is why I honestly believe that dogs are a much better judge of character than people could ever hope to be. My boxer dog ran up to him and launched herself onto him when he was about 6 feet away from me. She tore into his arm, and I saw blood. I started to scream, and my mom ran out shortly after. She was trying to pull my dog off of him, but as soon as she was able to, holding onto the dog's collar, she started yelling at him, asking why he was in our yard in the first place with me all alone. He couldn't answer her, and he just started running back to his bike, riding back to the trailer. My grandma ended up driving him to the hospital, as J&A didn't have a car, and I learned later on that he got 16 stitches from the bite. He never gave a reason as to why he was approaching me, and they ended up moving out shortly after. I haven't seen him since, and I'm still terrified to this day to run into him again.
A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no street lights, so it was very dark at night, especially when there were clouds blocking the moonlight. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I exited my car, I caught the faint whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, but I didn't see anybody outside, so I ignored it and went in. I just got off my shift with a few hours overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 o'clock yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later. I was sure that I heard a noise inside of my house. I wasn't worried right away, because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work. I even gave him a spare key. However, he would always text me beforehand, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen blinded me. These were the days before phones had light sensors that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright that I could use it as a flashlight. I squinted my eyes and could make out that it was 9-something in the morning, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread message in my inbox or not. I set down my phone and called out my friend's name. There was a couple of seconds of silence, followed by a loud footfall as someone started moving through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I opened the door and stepped inside. The house had 3 rooms upstairs, the bedroom that I was in, and a spare, with a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in my ceiling and hoist myself inside. I had just started to lift myself up when the person came barging out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door flew open. I heard the footsteps run into my room and then stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which had boxes stacked in the corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone was hiding, it would be in the first bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they began to climb up. From my vantage point, I could see from about their knees down. They were wearing a dirty pair of blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn-out work boots. After a few seconds of looking around my closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration. The scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me too much of my stepfather, who would shout in a similar way whenever he lost his temper. He would eventually be committed to a mental hospital. The man inside of my house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed hidden in the attic. I left my cell phone by my bed when I ran for the closet. I wasn't certain if I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the cops. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped over my bed, I assume in some attempt to find me. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I used my landline to call the cops. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but that was something I expected. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, all the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all the boxes and cans had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only thing that was missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked my house from top to bottom. They found out that the side door had been forced open by a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along the fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth. So whoever it was had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me that I should stay with friends and family for the rest of that night and get the door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep and moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next few hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence where the police had found the cigarette butts, but I never saw anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. I lived there for another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space in the back of my closet. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been just a bit slower, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom before making his way to my bedroom.